Meeple.
That's why I haven't done it.
Meeple.
Okay.
You're a woman of
The Public Safety Committee meeting is now called to order. Mr. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Alderman Bosley.
He's here.
Alderman.
Alderman
roll.
French.
Present. He said.
Alderman Vaccaro. Alderman Cohn.
Present.
Alderman Carter.
Present.
Alderman Coder.
Here.
Alderwoman Spencer.
Present.
Alderwoman Green. Chairman Kennedy.
Here.
Alderman Bosley.
Present.
9 present. We have a quorum.
Thank you. We have coming before us today to Public Safety the Chief of Police to talk a little bit about the crime statistics. First, I'd like to welcome everyone here today, the Chief and others who are here today at our meeting, and then our new committee members and the formation of this new committee. There are a few statistics that were passed out. This was taken off the city's website. Alderman French compiled this for us, so we'll have some data just to look at. I'm sure the Chief may have some things for us also. We first start. The copies are available up here on the counter for any others who may wish. Mary Ellen. We first have some opening remarks from the Mayor's office.
Yes,
From Mary Ellen.
from Mary Ellen. Ready?
Yes.
Right. Thank you for the opportunity to be here with all of you today to share some of the important work we have been doing as a city government to promote public safety, reduce crime, and to build a stable city. I want to especially thank you, Chairman Kennedy, for allowing me to come, as well as Chief Dotson. The committee had originally requested that Chief Dotson come to discuss police strategies. There is no doubt that Chief Dotson's role in reducing crime is a critical one. To many, the police department is the public face of our public safety efforts in the city of St. Louis. But policing is only one small part of how we can make St. Louis a safer place to live and work. For the next few minutes, I will discuss our comprehensive strategies for reducing crime and promoting public safety throughout our city. Nothing I am going to say is unfamiliar to you. The Board of Aldermen has, by direct vote, by budgeting, by oversight, by enabling legislation, or by consultation, been involved in everything I'm going to say. That means none of us can truthfully wonder what the plan is. So if we could start with the goals. The city of St. Louis should be a place where every mom in every neighborhood feels safe allowing her son to play outside after dinner. It should be a place where every dad in every part of our city is confident that his daughter will be safe playing in a well-maintained park. In our city, a senior citizen should feel like an honored resident, not a prisoner in his or her own home. And everyone, black or white, old or young, visitor or resident, should be able to come and go in every neighborhood without fear. These things are already true in many neighborhoods, but it is not like that in everywhere in St. Louis. It really isn't like that in any American city, but that isn't my concern today. The fact is that we know there are some neighborhoods more dangerous than others, and we're working to change that every day. We also know that the root causes of violence and crime are poverty and disparities in education, job opportunities, and wealth. We can't even hope to reduce crime if we don't start with these root causes. That realization informs our strategy and has been the subject of most of the legislation you aldermen sit here every week and discuss. The first large category has to do with employment opportunities, especially for young people and for those most used to finding closed doors. We are dedicated to ensuring that everyone in our city has an opportunity, a fair one, to get a job, starting with young people. For several years, the city has built out a summer jobs program for young people, STL Youth Jobs. We'll provide summer employment for 2,000 young people living in neighborhoods that suffer from high crime, low educational attainment, and high rates of poverty. The Bridge program will include 3,000 young people in the region, 1,500 in the city. We've worked with minority contractors to create a loan fund and created workforce goals for city public works projects and city subsidized projects. Our strategy, which most of you acknowledge, is to push the goals as hard as we can without losing the effort in the courts. Last fall, the mayor announced that the city would ban the box on city job applications, giving all deserving people a fair chance at a city job, even if they have a criminal record. And our lobbyist has supported Senator Nasheed's ban the box legislation in Jeff City. We asked the city's largest employers to join us. Some of them might, but all will if we can get a state law passed. We've continued a long-term commitment to prisoner reentry programs, making sure that ex-offenders leaving the state prison system can become self-sufficient without returning to a life of crime. The recidivism rate among the participants was less than half of that of inmates who were not part of the program. We also know that we have to be early interveners, entering the lives of young people who might otherwise wind up in a life of crime. So, the city has partnered with community-based nonprofits like Better Family Life to identify and engage with at-risk youth. But increasing job opportunities at the margins is not enough. We need workers, lots of workers, who have the skills and education they need to do a good work for their employer. We know that we will not reduce criminal behavior without addressing education, and that's the second largest category of the strategy. Too many kids in our region go to bad schools because there are not any convenient schools. Elisa Crouch's story this weekend about the conditions in Normandy High School should catch the attention of the General Assembly and the State Board of Education and provoke real change. In the city, some kids can afford, by luck, birth, or by scholarship, to go to good private or parochial schools. Some kids can attend great schools in their neighborhoods, or by test, or by lottery. Chief Dotson is a graduate of the St. Louis Public Schools, but there are just not enough good choices yet. And I should add, city government is very limited in what we can do to promote public school options for our constituents. But we will do everything we possibly can. And that is why the mayor has made the expansion of good public school options a priority. Since he was elected, 31 charter schools have opened, many in neighborhoods without any other good options. Several bad public charter schools have been shamed out of existence. As a result, twice as many kids now have good public school options in their neighborhoods. We're also excited about the new Flant Center, an early childhood center in the JVL neighborhood. The center staff is being trained by the folks at University City Child Development Center, a high-quality center that is in high demand. This center, along with the work being done by Grace Hill Head Start and the 800-plus new preschool seats added by the St. Louis Public Schools, are increasing quality education childhood options for families. We've also partnered with Rankin to start Youth Build, which employs 75 young adults to learn construction job skills and get paid while helping to build new affordable housing for low-income families. With organized labor, we've started the Building Union Diversity Initiative, which aims to increase the number of women and minorities employed in construction by creating a pool of well-trained and motivated union apprentices. And we're working with the Demetrius Johnson Charitable Foundation and the Painters Union to train young men and women to become professional union and non-union painters. We want to make sure that every person living in poverty has an opportunity to get a good education, to get a good, decent paying job, and to work for an employer that treats them fairly. And we want to live in a city where businesses invest throughout the city. Investment means rebuilding in some neighborhoods. Let's be honest about where we are. Too many neighborhoods are suffering from the private sector disinvestment that began shortly after the end of World War II. Neighborhoods that were once dynamic and diverse and vibrant, or at least dynamic and vibrant, lost their energy, their businesses, and many of their residents. This is a generational problem, by which I mean a problem that took generations to create and will be addressed by my generation, which is increasingly well represented in Room 200 and here at the Board of Aldermen. Overcoming disinvestment is one of our key initiatives. We are committed to pursuing every good idea, no matter how big or small, to redevelop those neighborhoods that are still suffering from these historical problems. You all know that we've supported big ideas, large-scale developments that have the potential to revitalize our city. From redeveloping North St. Louis to supporting the North-South Metrolink expansion, the mayor and this board have and will be tackling big projects. Few of your constituents, however, know much about the smaller projects. I think that the future is more likely to be defined by the successes of 1,000 small ideas than by the success of a few big ones. I am most excited about small-scale organic development sprouting up throughout our city, not just in the Central Corridor or downtown, though I'm very proud of what has happened on Euclid and Washington Avenue. We must do everything we can to promote these small self-starter businesses, many of which are owned by women and people living in poverty, and many of which are in neighborhoods that the big developers ignore. Patrick Brown and I will be back before you in the coming session with a series of bills that represent the concerns expressed in 100 meetings that we and the mayor have had with people who want to do business here. I promise you all a role. There is going to be plenty of hollowing in the rest of this building about how we can't change how business gets done. The great thing is that we can. and you and I will work together. You and the mayor's administration are already doing a lot to invest in low-income neighborhoods and to promote development throughout our city. For example, we have focused our investment from the Community Development Block Grant, the Affordable Housing Commission, and the Missouri Low-Income Tax Credit to renovate the housing stock and stabilize neighborhoods. That has resulted in thousands of new or renovated apartments and homes. We know that there are too many empty storefronts. We know that we also have too many vacant buildings. Vacant buildings and vacant land can damage neighborhoods. They are a breeding ground for crime, and they can bring down property values. So what have we been doing about it? Well, a lot, actually. Where vacant buildings have created dangerous conditions for the neighborhood, we've torn them down. In fact, in 14 years, we've torn down 9,663 buildings. And a team of city officials has been working with federal partners on a comprehensive vacancy strategy that we hope to discuss with you in more detail in the coming months. But the mayor does not believe that we can demolish our way to being a safer city. He knows that we need to find better ways of attracting new businesses to open, new residents to move here, ways to make the most out of the vacant buildings and the land that the city owns. But now I want to begin talking about the part of our public safety strategy that usually gets the most attention: policing. We know that the way we police our city has to keep getting smarter and better. Yesterday, the mayor signed into law the ordinance creating the Civilian Oversight Board. It represents years of complicated negotiations among the board, our administration, and the Police Officers Association. Predictably, no one is completely happy about it. But it is an important first step and a very useful model about how the administration wants to work with you in the future. We see the implementation of the Civilian Oversight Board as a great opportunity to include more people in reviewing police disciplinary matters. We look forward to working with this committee and with the Board of Aldermen to getting the Civilian Oversight Board appointed and up and running as soon as possible. And we want to do it with a minimum of finger pointing, pinching, hair pulling, and name calling. But we're not going to stop with the Civilian Oversight Board. Public Safety Director Richard Gray and Chief Dotson have been working on a number of initiatives, almost all of them suggested by you, by our constituents, or by the UMSL criminologists to make the police department smarter and better. I'll ask Chief Dotson to share more details about how we're doing that shortly. But first, I want to add a couple of Mary Ellen Ponder points. I think it would be a mistake for us to have a hearing about crime in our city without talking about holding courts accountable for the decision judges make. The mayor has asked the state judges to implement a gun docket where the public can better monitor how gun crimes are processed in the court system. A couple of years ago, the judges balked. They eventually adopted what they called an armed offenders docket. We had our concerns about it being strong enough, but we gave it an opportunity to work. Now we have results. Under the armed offender docket, the judges wanted 62% of gun criminals are released on probation. That means that out of 326 cases, 204 gun felons walked out of the courthouse on paper. This is a critical public safety issue for our city. We can't ignore it, and the public must hold our courts accountable for these decisions. And I want to talk about guns. There are too many of them on our streets. The Missouri General Assembly, which remains a rural caucus in its soul, is not going to help us with them. We will have to help ourselves. The mayor and Winston Calvert have some ideas. Patrick Brown and I will be back to talk to you about those during this coming session. I'd like to turn it over to Chief Dotson to discuss some of the policing strategies being implemented to reduce crime. But let me conclude with this. I've worked with many of you over the years here in City Hall. Whether we've agreed on this issue or not, I respect all of you. I want to work with you. I want to share ideas and hopes and worries with you. I want to build a safer, better, more vibrant city of St. Louis, and I want to do it with you. I am the face of something very different happening in room 200. If you have an idea how we can work better together, I want to hear it. If you have something you'd like to know about what we're doing, or would like to brainstorm the ways city can improve, I want to know. I care what you think, and I look forward to working with you in the coming years. Thank you for having me.
Okay, thank you. Will you be here the remainder
I will.
Of the meeting? It sounds like you're saying to me that the overall strategy includes more than just policing.
It does.
So then perhaps there's any questions come up on that. As opposed to, I can see the smiles already, as opposed to doing a bunch of questioning with you right now, my thought is to bring the chief up unless you have something burning bring him up. Let's hear his testimony, and then we can begin the questioning. And if you're here, there may be some questions for you as well.
I might need to run back over to the office for a second, but I'll come back.
Okay. If that is fine, I think I'd like to work it that way.
Okay.
Also, I just want to, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Before we bring the chief up, I just want to remind us, this particular meeting is a regular Public Safety Committee meeting. It is not a meeting for public testimony. There will be subsequent meetings that we'll be setting up for public testimony. Also, it is my hope to keep this meeting to around 2 hours, 2.5 hours, perhaps, if we need to push a little bit further. If we haven't gotten through all the committee members, we will come back next week and continue the discussion. If there are any, I believe there's all the people who are here who are not on the committee, we'll be taking questions from the committee members first by seniority, and then all the people who may be here afterwards. And so with that, we've asked the chief to come forward and to give us some brief. What we basically asked him to do was to review the crime statistics and then the strategies the department has in addressing the issues related to crime. And I asked that he keeps his comments brief to about 15 minutes.
Absolutely.
Okay, then.
So the first thing that I wanted to do was pass out, and I'll just hand these to pass it down. So thank you for the opportunity to have the conversation. What I've done in the past is a PowerPoint presentation to talk about crime. What you have in front of you is essentially, and if you don't have enough, here Dave, here's a couple more, is essentially, and I actually took this suggestion from Alderman French. He looked at the CompStat reports that were done in New York and in Chicago and made some suggestions. And so this is basically a report that talks about the last week of crime, the last 28 days of crime, year-to-date of crime, and then a little historical perspective. So the top graph, or the top boxes across the show just that week, 28-day period, year-to-date, and then a 2, 5, and 10-year perspective. At the bottom is a longer historical perspective. So this will give you a snapshot of what's happened in the city through 4/29, through April 29th. So I'll talk quickly about the categories, and then we can get into a little bit of strategy, and then I think questions are probably the most productive way to get through this instead of doing that. I'm disappointed, discouraged, frustrated by the amount of violence that I've seen in the city over the last year. The police officers have been doing their job. We can talk about the monthly trends a little bit and see the progression that we've made. The homicide number, the most current date as of this morning, we've experienced 12 more homicides this year than at this time last year. The level of violence that we've seen with aggravated assaults has increased during the first 4 months, although that increase is slowing, and we can talk about that and some strategies. And then categories like burglary, vehicle theft, larceny have also seen an uptick. If you look, something that I've added at the bottom of this that you have not seen before, shooting victims and shooting incidents. For UCR purposes, Uniform Crime Reporting, a shooting victim does not actually have to be struck by a bullet. If you're in a situation where imminent harm is possible, so I'll give you an example. You're inside a dwelling in your living room, and a shot comes through the front window of the house and into the room where you are. There's a possibility that you could have been struck. You're counted as a shooting victim. So you do not have to be struck to be counted as a shooting victim. A shooting incident is just that. A shooting incident can have multiple victims. One incident could have 2 or 3 or 4 victims depending on the circumstances. So it gives you a snapshot of what's happening past week, past 28 days, year to date. So I think that's important always to understand. So where are we at getting into the violence? As you know, the city has, and Mary Ellen did a wonderful job of talking about the initiatives and the things that need to happen. I've said before that I believe economics and education are the way out of some of the challenges that we have. Some of those are outside of the purview of law enforcement. What is inside the purview of law enforcement are arrests, interventions, and the courts. And so our officers, when you take out the 220,000 bench warrants that the city forgave at the end of last year, kind of adjust for that, arrests year to date are up 7%. Our officers have seen a 7% increase in arrests, and those are for the violent categories. Those are the homicides, the robbery, rape, aggravated assault, burglary, larceny, for the top 8 categories. We've seen an 11% increase in calls for service. So over the first 4 months of this year, an 11% increase in 911 calls, which is kind of an interesting phenomenon, because over the last several years, many years, calls for service have been relatively flat. So to see a 11% increase in the first quarter really starts to ask where the changes are. When we talk about our interventions, we partner with the University of Missouri, Rick Rosenfeld, to talk about what are the most contemporary, what are the best strategies. And as recently as this morning, when I got together with the command staff to talk about crime, Rick Rosenfeld continues to believe that hotspot strategies are the best way to address the issue. He suggests, and we've started to do this already, layering on top of that hot people. And to give you an example, if we talk about a geographic area, to identify the people in that area that are either currently wanted for crime, on probation and parole, or have some connectivity to the criminal justice system, and addressing them. So what we've started to do is to look at those geographic areas where we see an increase in crime, and specifically the violent category, identify the people in those areas that are currently wanted for crimes, currently involved in a crime, as a witness, a victim, a suspect, and really get into understanding what their participation is, because it comes down to lifestyle choices. We can talk about those a little bit. And then layering on top of hotspot, hot people, the interventions. And you've read about it, and I couldn't be more proud of the Homicide Ministers Alliance program, which really focuses on stopping retaliatory shootings. So when we have instances where families are upset and want to take justice into their own hands, we partner with a group of clergy to work with the family to help them work through the grief, to help them work through the challenges that they have, to try and divert them away from violence and let the system do what it's geared to. And then lastly, and Mary Ellen talked about it, the cooperation that we see with the courts is still continually challenging. 2011, Rick Rosenfeld did an analysis of courts and found that about 63% of the time probation was used in gun cases. Jennifer Joyce's data that was sunshined by Kevin Killeen indicates that still, even after the armed offender docket, which I've called window dressing from the courts, was put into place, we continue to see a 63% probation. That manifests itself on the street when we arrest individuals, and that group has a recidivism rate that's as high as 70% sometimes. So that means that every 10 people we arrest, 7 of them we have to rearrest. So when we talk about workload and what officers are doing, so when that manifests itself, when we arrest people and say, I'm not worried about it, I got paper the first time, I'll get paper the second time, the consequences of the system have to be part of the deterrent to keep violence from occurring. When criminals see that there are no consequences, and there is no change in employment status, is no change in education, in substance abuse issues, mental health issues, because the services aren't as robust as we'd like, what expectation could we have realistically that their life would change to a point where they wouldn't resort back to some level of violence? So I believe the courts are a significant player. I think it's telling that the mayor's office is willing to talk about courts. The circuit attorney's office is willing, as much as they can, they have legal obligations, are willing to talk about the role that courts play. Law enforcement talks about it. The communities talk about it. The only people that you never hear talking about it are the courts themselves. And so while you have the responsibility of holding me accountable, there's a significant portion, almost a third of the judicial process that has no voice or no accountability at all because they live in a sense of anonymity. So I'd be happy to talk about anything that you want to talk about, happy to address any of the issues that you have, and I do appreciate the opportunity because I think there is not a more important issue facing our community right now.
All right, thank you. We'll begin with questions from members of the committee. Alderman Bosley, any questions?
Yeah.
Okay. Alderman French?
Thank you. Thank you, Chief. Thanks for coming. It's been a while since we've seen each other.
I think it, as we've talked about before, it would be very helpful if you came on a more regular basis so we can have these conversations regularly. So I'm concerned, as many citizens are, about the violence that we're seeing in our city. What I'm also concerned about is what role you as a chief can play in improving that situation, and what role some of the decisions you may have made it worse. So just as was said earlier about the court system and their court docket, their gun docket, it was said that you want to give it a chance, the administration wanted to give it a chance to see how it works, and now that a year has gone by, you've seen the results, and now you want to find out how we can improve it. I have same concerns about redistricting. We had concerns in the beginning, especially how the different districts were staffed. We felt that the 6th district especially was very large now. That area from the northern part of the city all the way down to Grand and St. Louis Avenue is a huge area that encompasses a lot of those neighborhoods that have traditionally seen a lot of violent crime. But, you know, we're going to let you do your thing, give you some time. But now the results are in, and it looks like that has not worked very well. Now that it's been over a year, what do you think about redistricting? Do you have any plans to realign resources now that you've had a year under your belt? And what about specifically, my concern, the 6th district, and the amount of officers and the understaffing it looks like that is current in the 6th district?
So let's kind of start with that from the very beginning. The whole premise of redistricting was to balance the workload between each of the districts with exactly the same number of officers in each of the districts except the 4th, which has a contingent of officers which are supplemented by the downtown partnership. So each district has essentially same number of officers, same amount of calls for service, same amount of crime. The variable is geography. And in the middle of the 6th district, there are 2 large cemeteries which consume a considerable portion of the district.
I agree with that, and that's where we agreed. Now, our contention and our problem was, if you remember, when you propose this redistricting, is that by doing that, you treat all crime equally. So they have the same number of calls of service, the same number of officers, but you're treating car break-ins the same as shootings and homicides.
Well, and that's not exactly true, because homicides are investigated by a unit that draws no resources from the district. So, well, I hear you. So let's talk about the reality. So crime in the 5th and 6th district, North Patrol, is actually seeing a greater, is doing better, and I'm just looking for the stats while we're talking, is doing better than the rest of the city right now. So we are seeing increases across the city right now. The increases that you're seeing in North Patrol, the 5th and 6th district in essence, are not as great as the increases that we're seeing in other parts of the city.
Now, when you say crime, you're talking about everything. Now, I want to make sure we're talking about the same thing. I'm speaking specifically of violent crime, aggravated assaults and homicides.
So violence, and I'm just flipping through these as we talk about them so I can have the numbers in front of me. Violence throughout the city has seen an increase, and to pinpoint it to just north, the 5th and 6th district is not a true statement. So all of the districts have seen an increase in violence. All the districts have seen an increase in crime. The increases that we're seeing in North Patrol are marginally not as great as some of the other areas. So redistricting, I get a report card about the districts every week, and so I'll just kind of step through it with you. The 5th and 6th district average about 16% of the calls for service through the city. I'll just step through it. 1st district, 16% of the calls for service. 2nd district, 13.75, which is by the largest district in the city. So the 2nd district is larger than the 6th district in geography. The 3rd district has 18.4% of the calls. The 4th district has 18.26. The 5th district has 16.62, and the 6th district has 16.84. So as you can see, within a percentage point or two, the calls for service, the workload are spread out throughout the city.
But I think we have a metrics problem. So if I recall, you went to business school, weren't you?
Yeah, I did, yes.
Okay, so we're 2 MBAs here. We're going to talk about metrics.
All right.
So you keep measuring it by calls for service.
Well, and I have many, that was just the first category on the top of the page.
But what we know is that you get many more calls for service, for instance, in affluent neighborhoods than you do, say, for instance, in a College Hill neighborhood. You don't get that many calls for service in College Hill, frankly, because people have kind of become accustomed to the crime. They don't call as often. They get accustomed to the gunshots. So the calls for service alone is not a good measure of crime. Just for the sake of expediency, I really want to limit to 2 measures: homicides and aggravated assaults. Those are the 2 measures that I'm most concerned with, and those I think are the most accurate reflection of the violence.
Okay, so to have that, then the homicides are not investigated by the district officers. They're investigated by a separate unit.
No, but the number of homicides in a district, I think, is a good indicator of how many officers you need in that district to prevent the homicides.
I think when you get into the aggravated assault number. So I think if we had Rick Rosenfeld or any criminologists, and here, preventing homicides is the challenge that we all have. And it's not like, and I've said this before, the Minority Report. I can't look into it from a precog perspective. What I can do, though, is look at it and say, we need jobs, we need education, we need mental health issues, we need all of those things addressed in those communities.
And let me say, so you may not be able to know exactly who is going to get shot or killed, when, and where. But what we do know is where traditionally homicides occur, where traditionally what neighborhoods see a high degree of aggravated assaults and shootings. And it is my contention that those are the areas that we need to be investing officers in. And it's not just up to the police department. This is why we called for a comprehensive plan. So that might be where you put a Slate satellite office for job placement. That might be where you do extra things with after-school activities. But we know those neighborhoods that not just this year, but for the last 5, 6, 7 years that always lead homicides and shootings. So why don't we put more officers in those areas?
And that's a great setup, because we do. So for the last 4 days, we've done hotspot policing in North St. Louis. We've done pockets of hotspot policing in Wells Goodfellow, the West End, in Alderman Carter's area. And those are the discretionary officers, the officers that have the ability to work throughout the entire city. And we focus them in. And Ronnie Robinson is here, so I'll ask Ronnie to talk about it just for a minute. Just as an example, in the 5400 block of Garriche? The 5400 block of Garriche, just this week, we stopped 5 individuals with 5 guns. They got a number of guns off of the street last night. So I do agree with you. Those areas, and just to be clear, those areas that do see the violence do get extra attention. And those are the officers that have the responsibility for the entire city that we can focus into a specific area.
So this is where we get into a disagreement about strategy. So your strategy, as far as putting additional resources, is on a very short-term basis in the form of hotspot policing. It is not a long-term commitment of officers to have a sustained presence. It is a very temporary presence. Everybody knows that. Citizens know that. Criminal knows that. So yeah, it becomes almost, instead of, you call it hotspots, I call it whack-a-mole policing. So you know something's going to happen over here, or something happened, so you send some resources over there for 2 weeks. Now something's happened over here. You take those resources out of that neighborhood and then put them back over here. What I'm asking for, when I say a commitment of resources in the area, I mean assigned to that area over a long period, at least 12 months.
And so, and that's part of the reason why, and I agree, we need more police officers. And that's why back in October, the mayor and I asked the mayor, and he agrees, for 160 new police officers. And the vast majority of those officers are going to be in uniform, the vast majority in uniform, the officers that wear the blue shirts inside the neighborhoods.
Well, I hear you saying that, but first, let me remind you, almost every previous time you've come here before, we've asked if you needed new officers. You said no. Now we say you do, but even if we were able to pass this legislation, which is being introduced tomorrow, the earliest we would get those officers on the street would be 2 years from now.
There's lead-up time.
And what about now?
And
Not
so,
2 years from now, now.
And so the lead-up time, you're absolutely right, is 18 to 24 months for those officers. And so the ability that I have are to take those officers, special ops, mobile reserve, that have the ability, and focus them into areas. We've been in Wells Goodfellow, West End, Alderman Carter's. We're in the 5th District and part of the 6th District right now. We have a responsibility to police the entire city. The violence, and I agree, there is the probability and a propensity for violence in the 5th and 6th District. I have to be able to service the entire city. I could take those officers and dedicate them to the 5th or 6th District. While we might disagree on the strategy, we agree on the outcome. I want the violence to stop more than you do, because I'm the one that has to talk about it every day. But the strategy that has the most impact is the flexibility to move. Because what happens is, and I think the command staff and Rick Rosenfeld would verify this, we put extreme pressure on an area, it calms down. If we stay in that area,
For 2 weeks, it calms down.
and then it flares up somewhere else. And so I don't have the resources. And to go back and be fair, crime had been going down for the last 2 decades. We agree, until recently, the crime has been going down. The police department, when I came on in the early 1990s, was over 1,600 officers. It's 1,250 officers now. As crime was going down, everybody agreed. Police department, okay, we're managing. Now that's starting to go up. So the set of facts have changed, and you're right. I have said, do we have enough police officers? When you've asked me, yes, we do. But the fact pattern has changed, the basis. So we need more officers now. So I agree that we need to stay focused in those areas that see the crime. Major Robinson has been given the ability to have officers specifically to target, because a blanket approach, what we're finding, and this is what Rick Rosenfeld said today, a blanket approach is good, but targeting those specific individuals. So I've challenged each of the districts to identify the top 10, if you will, some number of people that are responsible for the violence, that are causing the violence. We have seen an increase in guns that we've seized on the street this year. We see an increase of guns in the hands of young people, and by that I mean 15, 14, 13-year-old. We've got a culture, and I don't know how the police department can get into that culture of having kids that have guns and are willing to use them. We agree. We focus on the areas that are hot. I don't have the ability, because if I take officers from one area, then we start to have problems. Right now, calls for service, crime are based. When we have violence, we put the resources into that area to try and push down the violence. I agree with you. We agree.
I'm not going to take a bunch of time. I'll ask the final question here, and then maybe we can come back. One, that's kind of gloom. So what we know is that we're not going to have any real numbers of significant numbers of new officers for many, many months. We have to figure out what to do in the next few months, given the resources we have now. While I agree with you that sentencing needs to change, those same judges have been there for years, and violent crime was going down. Something's happened in the last few months, and it hasn't been a change apparently there. But again, we can agree on that, we can work together, but that's a longer-term strategy. What I really want, and I'm glad that the Chief of Staff, or the Mayor, if she's still here, mentioned that, that we do need a comprehensive plan, and that's something that we are, you have a lot of allies here, including myself, who's willing to work with you on that. But it's got to be a productive conversation. And so my frustration comes in that, as an alderman in the 21st Ward, I feel like I've done a lot and have tried to support in many ways I can. You know, O'Fallon Park was an abandoned public space. We invested $20 million in that park, a new rec center, everything, but we can't get park rangers to keep it safe. We can't get the places to keep it safe. We invested over $600,000 in surveillance cameras across the ward. We can't get people to watch them. We have gone and organized our neighbors to participate in this community model that was put together by the police department and the circuit attorney's office. And then our neighborhood officer was kind of taken away and split between 3 neighborhoods instead of our 1 neighborhood. So we need some support, and it can't just be, it works both ways is my point. And the last thing is I want you to understand is that this stuff related to what we've seen in our community the last few months with Ferguson and police abuse, and even here in the city of St. Louis where we had what I would call police abuse, that matters. Because what it's done is really torn apart this relationship, this vital relationship between community and police. And everything I think that you do and that we do as government has to be about rebuilding that relationship. And a lot of that is going to be on how we deal with these cases of police abuse. If you let it slide, if you defend these guys who abuse their power, then all the good cop stuff, all the coffees with officers, all the officer-friendly stuff goes out the window. Like, all the work that we've done can be destroyed just like that when we have a case of police abuse. And where we're at now is that you have citizens, senior citizens, older folks, who are traditionally our allies in fighting crime in our neighborhood, who I find aren't calling police, or calling us as aldermen or somebody else instead because they don't feel comfortable calling police anymore. And that's something we have to work to repair. Otherwise, it's just going to get worse.
And you and I agree on about 99% of the things that you just said. I'll go through them quickly, because I do, and hey, we'll talk 2 hours today, we'll talk 2 hours next week, 2 hours the following week. I'd be happy to come back anytime that you invite me, just so we're clear. I heard you about the parks, and over the last year, the park rangers have come under our purview. And Sergeant John Vogt has done a wonderful job of managing the park rangers. During a 16-hour day, 16 hours a day, for about 8 hours, there are park rangers in the parks between O'Fallon, Fairground Park, and I believe just those two. So we get coverage.
Just to be clear, they have all of North St. Louis parks, so they roam.
They spend of that 16 hours, about 8 hours inside Fairground and O'Fallon Park combined. So I'm just giving an example: 4 hours and 4 hours. The rec center has done a wonderful job in O'Fallon Park of bringing life back to that. It's also done a great job of pushing crime down. I don't think there's been crimes reported in O'Fallon Park. I hear you, though. I know you want people to see
2 children shot
near the park, but not in the park.
It started in the park.
So, and that gets to guns. So I hear you. And so we've got in 16 hours, 8 hours of coverage in those parks. And again, if we had more officers, if we had more park rangers, it gets easy for me to do.
I can't let you off of that. We have park rangers. It is about allocation of resources. And those park rangers right now are permanently assigned mostly to Forest Park.
No, that's between the rec centers that are in the parks throughout the city. And
yeah, what, 20-something park rangers?
25 park rangers and 5 supervisors, I believe.
And how many are assigned to Forest Park?
John Vogt, I'm just looking at him because he's the manager, the supervisor for the park. How many are assigned to Forest Park?
On average, about 3 a shift.
So about.
Yeah, how many shifts?
During the 16 hours from 8 a.m. to midnight, there's approximately 3 park rangers inside Forest Park for each 8-hour shift.
Okay, so here's a simple question. If you got 20 guys who call themselves park rangers, how many go to work in O'Fallon Park? I mean, Forest Park? 12?
6.
3 per 8-hour shift.
I can tell you that we have 7 park rangers assigned to the city's rec centers, the smaller rec centers, and then Forest Park usually gets 3 of those and on each shift. So we have
How many shifts?
three a shift. So on a shift from 8 to 4, there would be 3 park rangers in Forest Park, and on a shift from 4 to midnight, there would be 3 park rangers in Forest Park.
So how many total?
So that's 6 a day.
6 a day.
6 a day.
6 a day. But how? All right, we'll get back to that.
Okay.
All right, so
So-
the point is that they're permanently assigned to certain parks, but we don't have any permanently assigned to 2 of the largest parks in North St. Louis. And this is where, I mean, if you come to those parks at 3 o'clock on any weekday, you will see chaos. All right, and so we want those parks to be used by families, and we need park rangers. Just permanently assigned, 2 at Forest Park, 2 at O'Fallon Park, 2 at Fairground Park.
And
that's their job. They go to work every day. They go to the park.
And
they build relationships with people. They know the guys who drink beer at the picnic. They know who parks here. Relationships.
And I agree. And we'll talk about community policing in a second. Cameras. I heard you about cameras, and that's why we've constructed our real-time crime center, which
Are you watching our cameras?
Which will have the ability to bring all of the cameras in that are capable.
But you're not watching our cameras.
So we invited all the aldermen to the open house at the real-time crime center. I guess you weren't.
Cameras were on the screen. Well,
you weren't unable to make it. You weren't there. But the idea is to be able to bring them in. We're in training, and right now, of the people to staff it. Your cameras, if they're capable to be brought in, and I don't know any of the specifics of your cameras, yes, they can be brought into the real-time crime center. So instead of saying that they're not, the question is when can we do it? Alderwoman Ingracia has been there, Alderwoman Spencer has been there, Carol Howard has been there, Jack Coder has been there, a variety of alder people. Chris Carter was there to see the center because they're interested in the cameras, and I'd be happy to bring your cameras in and give you a private tour anytime you're interested.
Here's the technology. I just want our cameras to be included.
And I think I just said they would be.
All right, well, when?
Maybe you can come take a look. The neighborhood piece, hey, we couldn't agree more. I think the last 9 months or so have damaged police relationships, not only in the city of St. Louis, but around the country. And that's why we have done things like I formed a new community engagement unit, and not only community engagement, but organizational change as well. So the name of the unit is Community Engagement and Organizational Change, because I realize that we need those relationships that you talk about. Who drinks beer, who parks where, who does those things, but we need to focus on what we can change. De-escalation training, implicit bias training, communication skills, all of those things. So I could not agree with you more. We have to be better as a police department. We have to be better as city government. We have to be better as a community. So that is probably the highest priority that I have outside of reducing crime right now, is causing the organizational change and making the connections in the police department. So I don't know if you saw the release that we put out about a month ago when we formed that unit, because it has to happen, and not the superficial stuff, not the coffee with the cops, which is important, but real meaningful change. And that's why when I go out to neighborhoods, to meetings, I want to talk to everybody. I want to hear what their concerns are, and I want to get at the root causes. So we agree 100% on that. And then one last thing, you talk about police abuse. Since I've been chief, over 20 people that were police officers are no longer police officers. I will not tolerate, I cannot tolerate, we should not tolerate anybody that gets outside of our expectations. So I have the highest expectations of the police department, and I am not afraid, even through the civil service process, to take on anybody that violates those. So far, the civil service process, and we did not have the civil service process until local control. I'm not afraid to take on those fights, even through the civil service process, to fire people, because I think it's the right thing to do. So we agree on that as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
We'll now go on to Alderman Vaccaro. Any questions?
Thanks for coming, Chief. I do have questions. On the courts, what are you suggesting? We vote to not retain judges? What is your, I mean, you're not, what is your thoughts?
So that's a great question. So, and when I go to neighborhood meetings, I ask people, well, how many judges do you know? And somebody will know one or two. As I go around the city and go to neighborhood meetings, I can count on the last 2 years on one hand and probably 3 fingers the times the judges have been at meetings, and it's because their wives brought them and they lived in the area or something like that. So the judges live in a sense of anonymity. So I think it's important that us as government, not police, not aldermen, but as government, shine a light on what they do in our community. So what I'm currently looking at is creating some sort of website, some sort of tracking that lists all the judges that handle criminal cases in the judicial circuit here, the 22nd Circuit. And then say, of the, I'm just giving an example, of the 100 cases they faced, they're green if they give probation in less than 1/3 of the cases, or 25%. They're yellow if they're in that mid-range, and they're red if they use probation as a primary tool. I will tell you that I think that message is getting through to the judges. I had a friend of mine that's an attorney call me on Friday and said that I think the judges are hearing you. There is a specific judge who sent people to jail last week who normally gives probation. I'm not talking about guilt or innocence, but when somebody's convicted or pleads to a case, found guilty or pleads guilty, I think there has to be an outcome. I think our message is now beginning to be heard. We're seeing higher bonds for criminals that deserve higher bonds, and we're seeing outcomes. So we didn't get here overnight, but I think that the judges are starting to see. And I would offer that perhaps this committee should invite one of the circuit judges. The presiding judge is Brian Hettenbach, and ask him. The courts, while they're state courts, their actions impact only the city of St. Louis. I think they have an obligation to talk as well about how their actions could potentially impact the city.
Okay. Next thing. Well, let me go a little backwards from what I wrote. I'm also agree with Alderman French that since the redistricting, the 2nd District, the 23rd Ward, 4 holdups, including at gunpoint last week. All these have been at gunpoint, but at gunpoint at the parts place up there, AutoZone, Mom's Deli, the Robinson's Jeweler. And we made a, just to be clear, we made arrest on Robinson's, we made arrest on Mom's Deli. And we're going to be there. The guys he pleaded on Mom's Deli, but as long as I've been alive, which is going on 60 years, I have not seen this kind of crime going on. And what you're seeing in my neighborhood are people leaving. And if we continue that trend, we'll get to be a hotspot place and I think I've told you that before, we can't afford, and I know we talk about the violent crime, but the violent crime, the car break-ins, the home break-ins, we can't afford to keep that up. I agree that I think the redistricting has not worked. Whether, just my opinion, may not be a fact, but in my opinion, since the redistricting, we've seen more crime, both violent and otherwise. A guy shoveling his snow gets held up at gunpoint. I mean, and it you know, and I'll admit that Facebook exaggerates stuff. Yesterday, I think Facebook was all saying there was a shooting, gunshots in the neighborhood. I don't know that it was ever verified by anything, but since the redistricting, we've seen crime increase, violent crime increase, stuff we've never seen before. And I would like to see changes. We don't see any park rangers. I have 2 parks in my neighborhood. Tillis Park at 10 o'clock at night becomes the party central for the city. People are leaving. They bought houses by the park because they wanted to live by a park. They're leaving the neighborhood because we're made promises that the police are going to roll through that park and they're going to be tickets written and people arrested for being there after curfew, for doing drugs in our park. Yet we see it for 1 or 2 times and then it goes away. It's like, here's a little pacifier now. We did it, now we're gone. I have issues with that. I really do. I mean, not just me, the constituents of the 23rd Ward have massive. I'm going to just go through my things and then you can answer them all at one time. I'll have one last question at the end, but the city marshals are under the police department, yet City Hall was shut down for 4 hours the other day. We have surveillance all around this place. We have cameras that are monitored, that I assume are monitored, sitting right at the front desk as you walk out. Have we found anybody yet? Has there been anything? What, has there been tapes? I think I asked you this before, and I was told that the pictures are grainy. We need better cameras. But how can we have city marshals in this building and feel safe in this building when somebody's allowed to put canisters around? So and I know I asked a lot of questions. I have one follow-up question. In fact, it's not even a question. I'd like to have the statistics of how many police officers we had starting back 10 years ago to present. Okay. A real number. If you can get that, I'd like to have that.
We can get that. That's no problem. And I kind of alluded to it. When I started 20 years ago, 1,600, then 1,400, now 1,250. So it kind of gives you an idea as how it stepped down since I came on in 1993, to give you an idea how it stepped down over the last 20 years. So let's kind of work backwards from that. The camera system. When the camera system was installed in City Hall, I'm sure the cameras were state-of-the-art, is a very robust system. As you know, and I don't know if the system's 8, 10, 6 years old. I'm not sure how old it is. Now, with everybody has a high-def camera on their cell phone, the expectations have become much higher. We are still investigating that, although it was not a device, probably not going to be a criminal incident because there was no threat associated with it. We're still working on it. The cameras, they're here, do provide information, but probably not at the resolution that we're used to seeing now, just because it's an older system. We've talked to the city about updating the system, and we're going to do a comprehensive review of all the cameras. And eventually, as Alderman French talked about, I'd like to bring them into the Real-Time Crime Center. So the Real-Time Crime Center is not the panacea, but it will be a nice foundation for us to bring all of these cameras and these aggregated systems. It's something the city hadn't had before, so the police department took the lead to create it. Not a light switch, doesn't change overnight, but certainly the cameras at all of the city facilities. The marshals have done a job of updating their protocols to make sure there are more frequent inspections of the outside of the building, physical inspections, eyes on, and again, we're going to work to update the camera system. So I think the metal detectors, the marshals do an excellent job in the city. What happened overnight, and we're looking at that.
Did the marshals work with you in the investigation when those canisters were out there?
We are certainly working with everybody.
The only reason I ask is because my understanding that one of the things we blew up was the marshal's backpack with his computer in it.
There was a bag, and there was a bag that was left near the stairs on the Clark Street side with the canister. We conducted an x-ray of that. The x-ray was inconclusive, so as a safety measure, that was just the standard protocol that our bombing and arson technicians would follow to make sure that it was safe.
No, and I agree with that, but you would think if the marshals were working with you, they would have said, hey, that's my bag, don't blow it up. Okay. Just observation, not
and I agree. I agree that we need to update some of the systems inside City Hall. The dilemma, and we'll go to, you're talking about redistricting. So Alderman French doesn't like redistricting, and Alderman Vaccaro doesn't like redistricting. Alderman French would like more officers. Alderman Vaccaro would like more officers. I'm sure when I get to Chris Carter, he would like some. Alderman Kennedy, Alderman Cohn. We have a finite number of officers, so we try to deploy those officers. I agree violence is a core issue that we have to get to. I hear you that people are moving out. The good news is people are moving in to South St. Louis as well, too. The houses don't linger very long on the for sale block. So while I hear you and understand that, adding more resources will help get to both of those root causes. But I also, and I meant to bring this up when Alderman French was talking, let's talk about the trend that we're seeing. Redistricting, at the end of July last year, so we're 6 months into redistricting, crime was down 13% in the city. At the end of December, it was down only 3%. So we were seeing an increase. We gave back 10 points over those last 6 months. We know a variety of reasons that could be. But let's talk about this year. So, and I'm just talking about violent crime. So I'm just talking about homicides, rapes, robbery, and aggravated assault. In the month of January, there were 203 more crimes than the previous January. In February, there were 37 more crimes than the previous February. In March, there were 35 more crimes than the previous March. In April, there were 2 more crimes than the previous April. So the trend is moving in a downward direction. Not good enough, not happy about it, but we were up 13, we had a decrease of 13% at the end of July. We gave some of that back. We're starting to move in a positive direction now. But just to give you an indication, crime and the officers, it's not a light switch. And so we have to see momentum, we have to see direction, and we're starting to see that. And that was just the violence category. All right, and then parks, same issue. Again, it's resource-driven, resource-based. But if there's specific issues that we need to address, we certainly have the resources to address those.
And that's right. Driving my parks at 10 o'clock. And I agree. I mean, I know a lot of the officers. I agree they're doing a great job. And I agree that a lot of stuff that Jennifer Joyce's office doesn't, you know, they bring evidence, but she feels it's not enough evidence. I realize that the police are also fighting a battle with the groups after they do the arrests, the courts and the city attorney or circuit attorney. I mean, I get it, and I'm not suggesting the police are doing a bad job. I just let you know that some of the stuff that, you know, since we're here, it just seems like, and I'll agree that the Ferguson stuff and all that came in too, but it seems like either all that hit right after redistricting and it's a coincidence, or the redistricting is just not working. I'm willing to give it a little more time, but I'll be honest with you, I have concerns.
And just we've had these internal conversations too about what changes we can make to redistricting, and it really comes down to a resource issue. And I'm being nice, but Alderman French would like me to send 30 more policemen to the 6th district. You'd like me to send 30 more to the 2nd. Chris Carter would like 30 more. We have to manage the resources we have to the best of the ability. And so that's why right now, and I appreciate the whack-a-mole analogy, I really do, because right now it is a little bit until we get a handle on the violence and the guns. We talked about the 5 individuals on the same block, we got a gun. It's not unusual for us to find multiple people with guns in the same neighborhood. Chris Carter last night, we were having a problem on Acme. It was Acme, wasn't it? We were there, we got a couple of guns off of Acme, if I remember correctly, last night. So the prevalence, I might have said this, but I don't know if I did. We've seen over 70% increase in stolen guns this year as well. The vast majority taken out of cars. So what that means is those legal guns that people buy, Cabela's, and have their conceal and carry permits, when they go to a baseball game, or gone to a hockey game or football game, or somewhere where they can't take their gun in, they leave it in their car in an unsecured fashion. Criminals know that, and we see break-ins to 5, 6, 7, 10 cars just looking for the guns. Nothing else is taken. They find a gun, they're gone. So that's a real challenge. That's how some number of guns are getting into the hands. 2 of those guns, if I remember, from Garochet were stolen. 2 of those guns that we got off of Garrishay were stolen.
Just my last follow-up thing, and that was, I know we had talked, which I appreciate, you came to that meeting that we had at, at Bartolino's, and we talked about there were 84 officers that have left from retirement and whatever, and I know we graduated 1 class, but we're still down a lot of officers. How far down are we still on just getting to where we were supposed to be, what we have funded already?
So currently we are 51 officers below our authorized strength. We have a class that graduated a week ago today that added 34 new officers. I've already had 1 officer quit in just the first week and realized that for personal reasons. We have a class of 24, I believe, in the academy right now, and I'm challenging the city personnel director. I would like to start another class the end of July, beginning of August at the very latest. So my goal would be to stay as close to our fully authorized strength, but the one thing we can't do, and I don't think you want me to do, is compromise the quality of applicants that we get in the agency. So I'm pushing the personnel department to give me a pool, and we can run a class as high as 35 or 40, and I can run multiple classes at the time to give me a strong pool of qualified applicants so we can keep our ranks up.
Okay, I know the reason I mentioned that is I know they're talking about when to hire more officers when we're not even getting enough in to fill what we need to.
We are going through a transition right now from this way that we hired under the state process to the way that we hire under the city process. So we have just completed that, and so this class that starts at the end of July, beginning of August, will have been vetted completely through the city process. So this is, we're in new ground now. So we've depleted the list that we had under state control, and now we're moving into the city process, and Rick Frank assures me that we'll be ready to go at the end of July, beginning of August.
Okay, thank you, Chief, I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Alderman Cone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chief, for being here this morning. I do have a number of questions, one of which I guess I'll start off with because it does seem to be a concern of all my colleagues. It's just the level of resources that are devoted to each of the districts. I share their same concerns. I would like 50 more in the first and the third. You know, I do think that there's some issues in terms of how things are reported on the south side because you do have some neighborhoods that are split between the first and the third that are very heavy crime neighborhoods, you know, Dutchtown, Gravois Park, Marine Villa, et cetera. Kind of straddle the boundaries right around there, and they're lumped into neighborhoods that are very much more safe than their own. And so I don't think that the stats that are reflected from those 2 districts necessarily reflect the true nature of some of the neighborhoods that are within those districts themselves. But you know, speaking of resources, and I know it's been brought up, but you know, we're looking at this additional 160 officers. Can you tell me, and you know, it's been brought to everyone's attention that it's going to be about 2 years before we can actually enact that. I'm going to rely upon you and your expertise as the former operations director for the city. How much are we looking to, how much is that going to cost to bring the 160 officers?
So figure roughly right now, 20 officers is about $1 million. I think it's about 17 or 18. So for every 20 officers, just rounding, that's salary. That doesn't include benefits and things like that. So for 20 officers, about $1 million.
So we're looking at about $8 million in order to get to what you would like to have.
The 160, $8 million, and then you've got pension costs, uniforms, equipment, but that's why it's about 17 or 18. But yeah.
So it's been a little while since I've been on Ways and Means, but as I recall, the fire department seems to go over budget by $2 million on a fairly regular basis. Why can't the police department do that as well and hire these officers?
Are you on Ways and Means now? So I'd be happy. I'd be happy to do that, except I don't think that's fiscally responsible. I think that if I did that,
I don't think it is either. But you know, I think it's on everyone's mind that we need these resources, and you know, it's clearly a paramount issue to the public safety and concern and well-being.
And that's a good question. And so I'll kind of get into that. So we are some number, 51 officers now under our allocation. I've got that money saved in salaries. I have told every captain, every unit to spend overtime to fill cars and to fill special needs. So we've done foot beats in hotspot areas. We have done special programs with overtime money because I don't have those 51 salaries to support. I've told them I'm not going to say a word to you about spending overtime. So we are trying to compensate and make up some of that difference by spending overtime money. This year will be challenging. I haven't seen the latest estimates on our budget, but we're going to be very close. We had overtime costs and expenses associated with civil disobedience and civil unrest that probably will be in the $2.7 to $3 million range. So I hear you about that, but I want to be fiscally responsible, because if every department went over, and then you'd be critical of me for why don't you stay in your budget. But I've told the captains and the majors, spend overtime. We have overtime money.
I guess my point being is that, you know, if we're able to find it for the fire department, I don't understand how we're not able to find it for the police department.
And I appreciate that, and I hope we can find it for the police department.
Okay. Well, so along the lines of the, I guess, 3rd and 1st districts, you know, I live and represent, you know, the Dutchtown neighborhood. I also represent parts of Carondelet and Mount Pleasant as well. Violent crime has gone absolutely through the roof in those areas, and I'm sure that Rick Rosenfeld has some, you know, thoughts on why that might be. I'm actually kind of curious to get your thoughts. Are there any other criminologists in the metropolitan area or in the country that we consult with? Because I hear Rick's name thrown out on a very consistent basis over the last 6 years that I've been an alderman.
Dave Klinger, who is also at UMSL, Rick, Dan Isom, who is now a professor there, and a couple other people. We've done studies with the University of Chicago. We've done studies with other universities. And so I'm always looking for the best ideas. I'm always looking for the best practices. I talked to PERF, which is the Police Executive Research Forum, who has gone around the country and consulted about violence. What's interesting is places like Chicago are seeing a similar increase in violence. Their shooting incidents and their shooting victims are up about the same percentages as ours right now. So this isn't a St. Louis specific phenomenon. It's going on around the country. One thing that I am looking at are grants that we can partner with into the private sector. And why not partner into the private sector to find the best practices? Minneapolis has a very successful program that was funded by Kellogg's about how to get into the violence, and it was more a comprehensive approach. I'm looking to bring some of the ideas that Minneapolis had. You know, we sent people to Kansas City to look at the no violence initiative that they have. I think pieces of that could be applicable here, but if you read the editorial in the Post-Dispatch this morning, Kansas City is also seeing an increase in homicides. It's not a St. Louis specific. I'm worried about St. Louis. I'm concerned about St. Louis. I only care about St. Louis, but as I look around, I'm looking for what other people are doing that's being successful.
I would love to hear more about that, and I'm sure we will over the course
absolutely.
of this session. So, and I know you and I have had a conversation at your office about this at one juncture as well, but, you know, the number of aggravated assaults, murders, et cetera, you know, crimes against person, by and large, seem to be committed by folks underneath the age of 26. Is that a true statement?
It depends on category, it depends on area, it depends on a couple of things, but young people,
29.
Young people are committing the vast majority of the violence now. That's true. I would agree with that.
So we actually had an initiative in the 1st District when it was underneath the command of, at the time, Captain Joe Spees, that actually worked on partnering with young people in the neighborhood to make sure that they were going to school. You know, there was a liaison in the police department that would go to those folks' homes, you know, make sure that they were there after curfew, et cetera. It worked. You know, crime went down in the 1st District while that program was in place, and specifically in the, you know, Dutchtown and Mount Pleasant neighborhoods. We were down double digits, actually, in crime when that program was in place. I understand that resources are an issue, but it seems as though when you're talking about hot person policing, I don't really like that term because it makes me feel as though we're trying to keep people down. But you know, there are proactive ways that, you know, the police can partner with the community, and particularly with young people who we know are at risk, and have had altercations and run-ins with the officers, probably on a fairly regular basis. I'm sure some of our officers actually know these young people by name, and you know, can point them out from a block away. So I'm curious. I know you have this new office of, you know, community engagement, but specifically, what are they going to do with young people in our communities and particularly in neighborhoods that do have a higher level of aggravated assaults and homicides, and making sure that those young people, that there is someone in a blue shirt that's following up with them at home, making sure that their parents are, making sure that they're going to school, making sure that, they're participating in a recreation program or an employment program during the summer, et cetera. How is that office going to support those types of activities specifically? Because I have experience with that in the 1st District, and it worked when we did it. I mean, crime was down double digits, and it was a really wonderful time. Now it's up double digits, and it's frustrating.
And I agree with you, that type of intensity and that type of focus. The best program that I've seen was actually one that was run by probation and parole. So it's just a little bit older than the group you're talking about. I'll talk about it, then we'll get into that. We did it in the Wells Goodfellow neighborhood. And they identified the individuals, the most at-risk individuals that were on probation, the people that had that recidivism rate as high as 70%. And they put them into an intense monitoring program where we went by their houses, and it was a probation and parole officer along with a police officer. Some had curfews, some had job requirements, some had school requirements. We went by all of those to make sure that they were there. But the key piece of it, I believe the key piece of it, was a neighborhood accountability board. And so these young people, which were the tough guys that we would arrest on the street, that would stick their chest out and be ready to fight with the police, when they sat down in front of, it was a resident, a business, clergy, when they sat down in front of these people, they would say, "You've got a 3-year-old daughter. When was the last time you saw your daughter?" And the answer might be 2 weeks ago. And they go, "Well, is that a good father? Are you being a good role model for your child? You're supposed to be going to GED classes. Why haven't you been going? How are you going to provide for your child?" And these are the tough guys that would be out on the street ready to fight us, would break down and cry, because this is the first time in a long time somebody had taken an interest in their lives. That recidivism rate, which should have been as high as 70% in that group, was 16% in that group. Those are the types of programs. That's what I'd like to see spread throughout the city. It works with juveniles as well. So maybe not the kid story, but when was the last time you got high? When was the last time you did something you shouldn't have? Somebody to take an interest in them. It's labor intensive. It takes neighborhood, it takes police officers, and it takes either the juvenile probation and parole officers or the state court probation and parole officers. Those are the types of programs I'd like to see in every neighborhood, because that does exactly what you want it to. The police can do it, but if there's not the hammer, if you will, of probation and parole having some consequences, it doesn't quite have the same impact. We do something that we call the Night Watch program, where we go around and make sure that juveniles are, if they have a curfew, they're in their house and things like that, but the consequences aren't there. And so if you have children, the idea is you can say no, you can say no, you say no, they continue to do it until there are consequences. And so we have to have a little bit of a hammer. I'd like to see that, and you're talking about the program that Officer Upchurch used to do. Right. I think it had a lot of value. It was funded through a grant. I think if we could find that type. And I'd be willing, and just be clear, in any neighborhood, I'd be willing to commit officers to a program like that because the dividends are so high.
I agree, which is why I'm curious why we haven't committed officers to a program like that on a regular basis and not just through grant funding. And I'm glad that you mentioned neighborhoods, because Dutchtown has been a very active neighborhood in trying to help itself and engaging residents. We've gone through a number of different initiatives, which I feel is part of an issue. Consequences are one thing, but consistency is another. Hotspot policing, whack-a-mole policing, whatever you want to call it, seems to be this most consistent program that we've had in place. But prior to a year or two ago, when we started hotspot policing, the kind of en vogue thing was the neighborhood ownership model. I have barely heard anyone speak about neighborhood ownership model aside from myself in my own neighborhood, which also was a very effective tool, not only for the police but also for the courts and the circuit attorney's office for prosecuting crimes as well, and also helped with keeping people in the neighborhood because we had residents that were reaching out and doing victim assistance as well. I feel as though, if we can focus efforts on, multiplying the dividend, so to speak, by engaging neighborhood residents and policing and actually what they're supposed to do as, citizens of this city, that it only benefits the police department. And so curious, because we have a neighborhood liaison officer. The First District also has a community engagement officer. I'm not seeing the activity that we used to, once did with the NOM, and just curious about your thoughts on that and why that might be.
So, the neighborhood ownership model is still very strong. I was at a ceremony in the Circuit Attorney's Office within the last 2 months or so where we recognized there are about 35 of the city's 79 neighborhoods that are organized in some level of that. It's so important to me that I do have a sergeant that's dedicated to coordinating it. Major Jones is responsible for your portion of Dutchtown. She'll work with you to make sure that if we need to breathe a little new life into it, whether it's on our side or on the community side, we'll do that, because I do believe that that is a significant key to changing things, and we should never lose focus on that, and they should never lose energy. And if they do seem to be waning, we need to breathe new life into it. So you have our commitment to do that, because I agree with that.
And I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but Dutchtown actually does have a neighborhood accountability board that works with the juvenile probation officers.
I'd heard it, but I'd never seen it, and that's great. I'll tell you, I went to the first meeting that I went to. We go to a lot of meetings. I'm like, okay, I'll go for 20 minutes and I'll leave. I stayed for over 2 hours because it's that compelling to see them in action. So that I had heard that. I just hadn't been to that Dutchtown meeting.
That's all the questions that I have for this particular meeting. I
Thank you.
have plenty more, but I want to save time for others.
Alderman Carter.
Hey, Chief. How are you? My first question is, I think I always ask this one first. What's being done to better the police relations within the community? And I know you gave a few examples, but I'd like to hear it again.
So yeah, let's start with what's interesting and I'll start with what I said to the Academy graduates. I met with them the day before they graduated, and there were 3 things that I said that would measure if they're successful police officers. I think the first thing, and this is just kind of the tone, is treat people the way that you want to be treated. Treat them with respect. Learn how to communicate with people, because the vast majority of people we deal with are like us, are the good, fine, law-abiding, upstanding citizens, and don't let those few people that we deal with that are criminals drive the way we communicate. So be strong communicators. And then address everything that we do with a sense of urgency. No matter what part of the city that you're in, we have to have a sense of urgency. So to get to your point, it's been made clearer to me the strong and deep fractures that exist between law enforcement and the community, and not just in St. Louis, but in the region and in the country. And the unfortunate part is that the term police has become generic in many situations. That the police now describes the city of St. Louis County, Wellston, Pine Lawn, Velda Village, everybody. And I don't want that to be the case. I want each agency to stand on its merits and stand on its own validity. That's why it was important forming the Community Engagement and Organizational Development Unit, because I wanted us to be different. And the unit, and I made it painfully clear internally, the unit isn't to go out and do those things. It's to go out and teach the agency how to engage the community. So every officer is that outreach officer. So every officer is the officer friendly, the cop on the block, every officer. And the way that we do that is through training, through setting expectations. So we're already doing, and this is, I sat through some of this training the other day, our de-escalation training. How to de-escalate a situation. When we think about de-escalation, we think about the violence piece of it, but how to de-escalate a situation that's just starting to move up, to make sure that we don't do anything to add gasoline to a fire, to calm the situation down. And then how to deal with situations where violence is, how to de-escalate that. Talked about implicit bias, helping the organization understand that all of us, as we're growing up, are programmed with biases. Subconsciously, in many cases, sometimes overt, but subconsciously, many times, that when you look at people, you look at them through a filter. To take that filter out and look at people just as people, to make sure that we're delivering the services consistently throughout the city. I think that's important. And then to do the more traditional stuff, the coffee with the cops, officers on bikes. You've seen our mounted patrol going out more, trying to make a connectivity. I will tell you, people love horses, people love dogs, and they love seeing officers on bikes. we've become, as a society, not just police, but as a society, dependent on our texts and our tweets and our social media, and we've lost that connectivity. Even in neighborhoods where everybody used to know everybody that lived on their block, now they don't know them as well as they did probably as little as 5 or 10 years ago. I want them to know the police officers that work their neighborhoods. I started a program where anytime there's a neighborhood meeting, the captain is supposed to bring the officers that ride that area, ride that beat, so the community gets to meet them, and they get to meet the community. It's a lot easier to communicate if we know each other or we've met, you know, over coffee or cake at a neighborhood meeting than it is when you call and you're in crisis, and we're in crisis mode, you're in crisis mode. So really those grassroots things. But the thing that troubles me the most is that law enforcement is looked at in a generic term. And I really want the Metropolitan Police Department to be the example or the role model. And so this is where you can help. And not just you, but everybody. When there are opportunities, when we see things that we can do together, let's do them together. Right. And realizing that 50% of the burden is on the police department to change.
Right. Do we currently have the shot spotter system set up in different neighborhoods?
There are about 3, I'm trying to, it's either 3 or 4 miles of shot spotter that cover the city. 2 miles, half of the systems are in North St. Louis, half of the systems are in South St. Louis. That's something that will be wired into the real-time crime center. Okay. And I like shot spotter, but I found it's not as effective as you would hope until you tie video cameras into it. So in a matter of almost real time, you know, 10, 15 seconds, the system alerts to a gunshot. Mm-hmm. We dispatch officers. It takes officers 3-4 minutes to get there. So whoever fired the shots potentially is long gone. Right. If we can tie that to cameras in the area, and as soon as we get a notification, start to move the cameras that cover that area. So something in the real-time crime center, and you saw a little bit of the shot spotter demonstration there. When a shot goes off, the map will populate with any cameras that we have access to in the area, and we can immediately go to those cameras and see if it can help provide evidence. So the interesting thing about ShotSpotter, when we first installed the system, it was a purchase. You would buy, and it was a mile cost about, my numbers will be rough, but about $225,000, $250,000. Now ShotSpotter has moved to a subscription-based system, and so to cover a mile, it's about $50,000 a year. So as you can see, the cost is to cover 4 square miles is about $200,000 a year.
So we basically, so what you're saying is, I'm pretty sure that we won't invest more in the ShotSpotter system without investing more into cameras, right?
I think the benefit, a stronger benefit, comes from having cameras associated with it. And here's the reality: as we start to talk about that, if it's a choice between investing in technologies or investing in people, we got to find the balance. Because you know that camera, that ShotSpotter system for $50,000 will cover 1 square mile. $50,000 will buy a police officer, and they can cover more than a square mile. So kind of an interesting, I think technology has a spot, but we have to find the balance between technology and people.
So will the police department be looking into purchasing some of those cameras that you had at the Real-Time Intelligence Center?
Absolutely. As we work with alder people, as we work with the aldermen and alderwomen that want cameras in their ward, I think there's a conversation. And what you're talking about is those highly visible cameras. Those highly visible cameras. Yeah. I think there's benefits to both. You have to tell me what you think works best in your ward. If you want the visibility of the flashing red and blue lights, or if you want something that's a little more subdued.
Okay. Hotspot policing. So I'm thankful that I had it for the time that I did, and it was great for the time being. But I share the same concern that others do. And I think I said it on the news when we were sending off officers that day. It was great having it, but when the officers left, and the crime came back. Or the crime never left. It just probably died down. So, my question to you is there a more permanent solution? And I'm pretty sure that you answered that.
And again, and this is, we all share some responsibility for this. As crime was going down, the size of the police department shrunk. It was no secret. It never was a secret that we had 16 officers, 1,600 officers, 1,400 officers, 1,300, 1,200. It was never a secret. Now, as crime's going up, we have to prioritize, and I think we all agree we do have to prioritize those officers. We have to find the most expedient way to get them back on the street. In the meantime, what we have to do is have the best strategies. And I could offer, and we're having conversations, I don't think this is a prudent strategy, but to take those units that have responsibility throughout the city and divide them up among the districts. But the synergies, the efficiencies come from having that overwhelming force that comes into a neighborhood. So I'll give you an example. The largest unit that we have that's not in a district of special operations, it's about 50 officers. So if I divided that up, that's 10 officers per district, divided among 3 watches, that's 3 officers per watch. Give each officer a day off, that's 2 officers per watch. So that 2 officers per district per watch, I don't think has the impact that it has of having this force that comes in that's able to dampen down crime the way that you described it. When they're there, it stopped.
Right.
It stopped. So I think that's the benefit. 2 additional officers in each district on each watch would not have that impact.
Right, but when they're moved to other areas too, other areas still suffer, because I think it was a point in time where, like, my property officer was pulled, my NOM officer was pulled to hotspot another area. So within that time, being my ward kind of lacked in, you know, being productive with problem properties and, you know, different things that we had going on with the NOM. And so just wanted to throw that out there. So redrawing of the, redistricting. Mm-hmm. I have to agree with Joe and Alderman French on that one. We had a meeting a few months ago, and I don't know if the captain got the memo, but Captain, he basically told a room of my residents that when the lines were redrawn in the 6th district, no disrespect to any other alderperson, but 2 of the worst neighborhoods in terms of crime were added into that district. And then we kept the same amount of officers. So I believe the question was asked to him, well, how many officers do we have patrolling? And I think the answer was 9 in the 6th district. And that was a huge concern of mine. And I know that it's, you know, everyone else's concern to have a district that's already probably one of the worst just in terms of crime stats and aggravated assaults, murders, shootings, everything. And for us to keep the same amount of officers, you know, I think that that's a major issue. And
I'd have to look back. I think you did get additional officers.
Okay.
But when it comes...
Maybe he was wrong.
And there are 9 beats in each district. So there are 9 cars that ride 24 hours a day. And then for 16 hours a day, when we're staffed, each district has overlay officers. And those overlay officers are the officers that are able to have the flexibility to ride throughout the district. So I've heard everybody about redistricting. If the workload wasn't balanced, and I hear you about the violent crime, and that's why we've talked about that. If the workload wasn't balanced, I would fix it. The workload is balanced. What I want now are more officers to push that workload down. Because if I take from, and I just do it in reverse, if I take from Alderman French's ward to put him in Alderman Vaccaro's ward, you're going to be mad at me. If I take him from Alderman Vaccaro's ward to put him in your ward, he's going to be mad at me. So what I'm doing is crime, calls for service, reports. I take a look at everything, response times, and try and keep everything consistent through the district. So when Mr. and Mrs. Smith on Acme or whatever street call, they have a response that's similar to Mr. and Mrs. Smith that call in Lansdowne. I try and make sure beforehand, and I'll give you an example, the 8th district, when we had 9 districts, the 8th district had 47 or 48 officers. I don't know how you can police any district 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with 47 or 48 officers. So the people in that ward were suffering tremendously, or that district were suffering tremendously. So is it a perfect system? It's based on data. Is it a perfect system? No, I'd like more officers, and we've already made that clear and said that.
All right. In terms of traffic police, how many different traffic units do we have? Because I'm getting killed just in terms of residents concerned with speeding up and down residential streets. I have it on my street, and I'm pretty sure that every other alderman is hearing it from their constituent base as well.
So, what I'd like to do is when you have those issues, send those to me. Here's what I've done. Beforehand, we had a traffic safety division that wrote tickets on the interstate. I don't want to say this too loud, but I've taken them off the interstate and put them into the neighborhoods because I think our bang for our buck is inside of our neighborhoods. And so the traffic safety division is about 20 people. I can look, but it's about 20 people. They're in neighborhoods writing tickets all day long. So if you have problem areas, problem streets, we'll address it and send it to us. Okay. Because I get a staff report from them every day, and they say they were in Penrose, Baden, and Bevo. These are the tickets they wrote. They were in St. Louis Hills, Walnut Park, Penrose. Here are the tickets that they wrote. So neighborhood is our focus. Give us the locations, and we'll get to it.
Okay. Asset forfeiture, money. I ask you about this too every time. So I know that money was given to Better Family Life, right?
It hasn't, but it will be. Yes, it hasn't been given to them yet.
And so, will you now invest more in crime prevention, I guess, versus whatever else you spent the money on in the past?
I would be happy to talk about it. Our asset forfeiture money right now is being used to purchase a building on 59th Street to house our property custody. That money was originally going to come out of the bond issue that you're addressing now, the GO bond. There was a financial advantage to paying for it now instead of waiting for the GO bond to the city, so we're using asset forfeiture money to pay for that.
Are we using all of it?
A significant amount, not all of it. To your crime prevention point, I'd be happy to talk about any ideas you have. The only restriction that I have is the federal government says that now no more than $25,000 can be passed to a community-based group. So Better Family Life.
You can do like 10 groups and give them all 25,000, right? Or this is 25,000 overall.
At max.
Oh.
So, and I wrote to the Department of Justice and said, given the unique situations in the region, I would like to exceed that cap. And they said no. So right now, Better Family Life at $20,000 and Do the Right Thing at $5,000. That $25,000 cap renews each year. But right now, I have a max all in to transfer to a community group $25,000.
Okay.
And we could give 25 groups $1,000 or one group $25,000, but no more.
All right.
And I agree with you. That money could be used in other ways. It's being limited. We could use it for other ideas and other things, but we could sit down and talk about it.
All right. You know, I was having a conversation with my dad yesterday, I believe, and he was telling me when he was a cop that officers were able to put in a service request, like city stuff, like if a street light was out, that he could put that in a way, and now they don't do that. I'm not trying to add extra work to your load.
No, I'll give you an example. Through our dispatchers, we can call and say the traffic lights at such and such are malfunctioning. Have the street department respond. These banks of lights are out. So that process is, it may look different than when your dad was there, but we give service requests to the city all the time. John McLaughlin, who works on our problem properties, asked to have buildings boarded up all the time, alleys cleaned, vacant lots. So we do that. It may look different, but we still do that all the time.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I mean, well, I have the same concerns and the same frustrations that you do. You know, we are on the hook just as well as you. Alderwoman Berninger, she just had a conversation with one of my constituents in the hall, and you know, she simply said, well, you know, my alderman isn't. He isn't addressing my concerns. And she asked her what were her concerns, and her concerns were that the police weren't coming when they called. Am I right? Mm-hmm. And so,
and let's be clear. If anybody ever says to you that they called 911 and we didn't respond, I want to know about it. I have the expectation, and the community has the expectation, and they should, that anybody that calls 911 gets police service. So if she says I called the police at 2 o'clock on Tuesday afternoon, tell me that and we'll look into it, because you don't want that and I don't want that.
It's a long list of folks, and I believe that is that's an issue. I believe that calls for service may be down in a particular area, like
they're up
like
11%.
Alderman French
They're
just
up
said.
11% across the city. They're up 11%.
But I believe that they'll probably be up more if you know, if things were a lot different. So like we have a lot of folks you know, within our neighborhoods that just don't call. I mean, I get calls 24/7 about it, and I try to get people to call, and I tell them that I don't have a special number to call, that I call the same number that they call to get things done. So I mean, we have to do something.
And I agree, and I just had an example of that last night. If you were familiar, there was a shooting at 14th and Olive. It started with an altercation inside the building. They escorted one young man out, didn't contact the police. He stood outside and waited for the other young man to come out. So it all starts with a call to 911. So if somebody doesn't believe they got the service, I want to know about it, because that's not acceptable.
All right, thanks, Chief. I'm looking forward to working with you.
Thank you.
Alderman Coder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chief, for being here today. While I was preparing for this committee hearing, I really wanted to focus on some of the positive things that you and your department have done, and things that you're working on, such as the Real-Time Crime Center. I know you mentioned that earlier. I appreciate the tour you gave me and the other Alder people recently. I'm very much looking forward to that being fully operational, and hopefully getting some more cameras up in the 7th Ward that tie into your system. I also was very pleased to see a couple weeks ago during the first robotics competition the increased police presence downtown. Having those officers on the corner when we had 20,000+ kids and adults from all over the world here for that competition, I think keeping them safe is paramount. So I appreciate you doing both of those things. You just alluded to the shooting at 14th and Olive last night. That shooting occurred, and I won't get into the details. I did speak with Captain Howard this morning, and both of your captains that cover my ward, Captain Warnicki and Captain Howard, have been wonderful, very responsive, and I very much enjoy working with them and appreciate the hard work them and their teams are doing. That shooting last night is, one of many incidents we've had downtown. I know I'm very concerned about downtown. I know you're very concerned about downtown. The business community, the residents, the government employees. We've got a lot of people here. This is the economic engine of our region. And I'm particularly troubled, and I know you are as well, and I know you guys are working behind the scenes on this problem. But, the incident last night, another shooting in broad daylight. 2 weeks prior, during First Robotics, we had an individual was murdered near City Museum, also in broad daylight. Looking at your stats downtown, aggravated assaults are up 50% downtown. There's 30 this year, 20 at this time last year. These are big increases. The shooting last night happens literally 1 hour after I left a meeting with a major property owner who owns property right in that area, who's very, very worried about his investments and about his residents. He's got hundreds of units and tens of millions of dollars invested. And so I know you're hard at work on this. I know you're working with the partnership, with the mayor's office and everything, and I'd like you to just please tell the public, what do you guys need to make downtown safe? Because if we can't make downtown safe, the rest, it's a tax base. It's a tax base for the city and for the region. People have to feel comfortable coming to work, coming to play down here. So what do you need? I want to help. What do you need?
And I appreciate that. And I'll start with the robotics convention, because you talked about that. 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a little before 3 o'clock in the afternoon that day, a gentleman's driving down the street and sees somebody that potentially owes him money. Gets out the car and they have an altercation and start shooting. There were 35 police officers within an eighth of a mile, 0.8 of a mile. There could not have been a higher saturation. It just goes to show to the point that the availability of guns, the willingness of people to use them, regardless of the environment. The shooting last night started with an altercation inside. Had the police been called, and they were not, perhaps we could have had an intervention that would have engaged there. Talking about some of the gun battles that have happened on the fringes of downtown. One of the most recent ones that ended, that came through the depressed section at Highway 44 that ended at Jefferson and Lafayette. Young man that's on probation has a gun in the car, shooting at people indiscriminately. So let's start with more officers. Let's start with putting increased pressure on the courts. Let's talk about having outcomes through probation and parole that keep us safer. Downtown, talk about overall crime. The homeless population is a challenge, and I know the mayor's office and Eddie Roth have some significant plans to address that. We have become the epicenter for homeless services in the region. Just recently, we've seen municipal police cars dropping off people at service providers downtown. We have our role in that, but we are not the region's depository for homeless. We have to get at a better way to address that as a region. It's no secret I'm a big regional proponent. So more officers, outcomes that really are focused on keeping us safe, and then being in the right spots at the right time. The robotics convention, we talked about it. Those additional officers push crime in the 4th District down significantly for that period, but you've got a gentleman who has a gun, who sees somebody and has a beef and pulls it out and uses it. I don't know what else I could have done that day. 35 police officers in the immediate area, and still it happens. Well, we can continue to push it down. And I think it's encouraging when I talked about January, February, March, April numbers that we are starting to trend in the right direction. Just to follow on the redistricting question that you had, the downtown partnership, the downtown businesses would like to have their own district. That's not the right answer. The right answer is to stay with a model that we have, add up additional officers, and continue to focus on the hot spots. So I hear you. It's a concern. The economic engine of the region, we have to be safe. That's an area that we've talked about overtime, spending overtime. An example, I just wrote a letter to John Nations at Metrolink saying I'd like to see some changes on Metrolink about the way the enforcement is handled, because we know that Metrolink has been the root cause of some problems, or at least people coming into the area. I'd like to address that. We've used things like the Rapid Response Group. We talked about the presence that we had downtown for the robotics convention. The Rapid Response Squads work Friday, Saturday, and Sunday during peak times. We saw problems in the Del Mar Loop early on this year. The Rapid Response Squad has been addressing those as things are calmed in the Del Mar Loop. The Rapid Response Squad has been in Fairground Park, they've been in O'Fallon Park, they've been in Keener Plaza, they've been downtown. We now send those to the areas that have problems that are hot. So we do have strategies, and I think that we will continue to put pressure on them, but until the whole system engages the same way, we'll be challenged.
All right, I appreciate your comments. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
You mentioned regionalism, and that's the other thing I wanted to touch on. Both you and I on Sunday had the opportunity to attend a briefing by PERF and Better Together about sort of regional policing. That report was released this week, and it talked a lot about consolidation, especially in North County and things. But it also mentioned a number of things regionally that could potentially be done to, I guess, make sure resources are allocated regionally and more efficiently. The need for 160 more cops, I certainly get it, and I want to get it done as quickly as possible. So what I'm interested in is how can we start to figure out ways to further consolidate regionally certain areas of the police department to free up more existing money, or maybe get some folks that are doing, some officers that are doing administrative jobs back out on the street. So, with that in mind, what do you see as sort of the next thing that we can start to talk about consolidating with our regional partners? I know we have several good examples that are working great. Our air support unit, which is a regional unit, works wonderfully. I think we all experienced the professionalism of our bomb squad recently on our swearing-in day. So those units work great. What do you see as the next step? Where can we consolidate, free up some existing cash, and get more officers on the street as soon as possible?
So, and this is great, on my desk for me to edit today is a letter that I wrote to the county chief that said I was at the Better Together meeting on Sunday, and I see some opportunities for the city and the county police department to be leaders in this area. One of PERF's recommendations was consolidation of a police academy. One of their recommendations is consolidating dispatching points. Both save money, both uniform police response throughout the region. There are many others in there. So I will be sending that letter today or tomorrow to the county chief to say, let's be the leaders in this area. I think there's a lot of work to do. I think that I always worry, and I said this and I'll say it again, I'm in the minority of police chiefs when we talk about regionalism. If you think about it, there are 60+ policing agencies in the region. 60 police chiefs have jobs, 60 command structures, 60 HR functions, 60 of everything, and they see regionalism as attacking their areas of responsibility, and see that I'll walk into a room of municipal chiefs and you can hear the air being sucked out of the room when I walk in, because I do believe consolidation. If you look around the country, places like Charlotte and Mecklenburg, a couple of decades ago, combined their city and county. Now they're the home to Bank of America. They're a thriving area. Indianapolis has seen some consolidation. I think Louisville has. Economics are the answer. Economics are the key. I think with all of these duplication of services, I know there's this not in my backyard mentality, but I think if we're serious about it, somebody has to be the grown-up and the adult in the room. I think it's our responsibility. I think it's the city's responsibility, because when people Google St. Louis and they're thinking about bringing a convention here, it doesn't show you the crime rate in Wellston or in Pine Lawn or in Ferguson. It talks about the city of St. Louis. Talk about the numbers separately. That's a perception problem. That impacts all of our businesses, all of our hotels, our quality of life, because if we can't bring conventions here, we don't employ enough people. If we don't employ enough people, we don't have the strong tax base. If we don't have the strong tax base, we don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the schools, we don't have everything. So somebody, and I'm saying we are, and I think we all agree, there's a lot of work to do there, but I think we have the stomach. The question is, do the smaller municipalities?
Understood. Well, thank you, Chief, and I appreciate your comments on that front. And I look forward to seeing the county's response to your letter asking for more regional cooperation. And please, anything that we as individual aldermen can do to help, I know I'm certainly willing to. And I appreciate, again, the work of you and all the men and women in your department.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Alderwoman Spencer.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chief, for being here today. And I want to thank you, too, for spending some time with me this last week. As a new member of the board, that time was really valuable, and I greatly appreciate it as well. The police department really came and helped us out at Cinco de Mayo. I think we can all agree that community events and events like Cinco de Mayo that celebrate the diversity of our city are really great, and I really appreciate the department helping out with that. We've been talking about how crime is up citywide. You mentioned earlier that those increases on the north side are not as pronounced as they are in other parts of the city. Can you talk about where those increases are most pronounced?
Go with your next question. Give me a minute to get the data in front of me, and then we can talk about it.
Well, the next question would be in follow-up to that. What do you see as the reasons for those increases?
So if you look in, Alderman Vaccaro talked about it, I've seen increases in robberies, in aggravated assaults, in neighborhoods that have traditionally been a little more stable. Mm-hmm. I think there are many issues. I think that as development has happened, what areas traditionally may have been pocketed have now spread through to other areas. I think the availability of guns, I think the lack of conflict resolution skills, I think the lack of ability to communicate, and what used to be settled, and this is a cultural thing, and I've talked about it with James Clark at Better Family Life and a variety of people. What used to be we were able to work out our differences now quickly resorts to violence, and that violence used to be, well, let's go behind the school and we'll settle this as men. What happens now is, let's see who's got the bigger gun and can get out fastest and shoot with it. Just the most recent homicide on Natural Bridge at Goodfellow, just this past week, the young man that was murdered had a gun and just didn't get it out as quickly as the other person and just start shooting. It's a culture that's prone to violence and quick to go to violence. I think we can change that, but I think it will take all of us to change that. And I think it's getting back to a sense of neighborhood and community again that I think we've lost because of social media, perhaps, and our resilient reliance on technology.
I want to talk for a minute about density of crime. So if we look at aggravated assaults in the city of St. Louis, right now, year to date, we're looking at 1,067 aggravated assaults. I looked through the reported crime stats on the police department website, and my ward, the 20th ward on the south side, is comprised primarily of two neighborhoods, Dutchtown and Gravois Park. Those two neighborhoods, Dutchtown has seen 66 aggravated assaults year to date, and Gravois Park has seen 32. Together that makes 100, which is almost 10% of the aggravated assault citywide. That's 2 neighborhoods out of a city of 79 neighborhoods. If we look at that on a acre-to-acre basis, Dutchtown has 2.7 times, aggravated assaults per acre than the city. Gravois Park, 4.5. It's not just a little bit denser in violent crime. That is 4 times the city average on violent crimes. This is really alarming to me as the alderman of these 2 neighborhoods. Gravois Park, in the last 2 weeks, or excuse me, in the this last week, we had seen 4 incidents with guns where an individual was shot in Gravois Park. And so I want to hear your thoughts on what I can do as an alderman, what I can do as a community leader and organizer, and what we can do as a city to take these stats and look at them and metrics of density of violent crime. Because to echo Alderman Cohn's sentiments about the districts kind of dividing this, Dutchtown is divided, the density of violent crime that we see in Dutchtown and Gravois Park are not reflected in the 1st and 3rd districts' overall averages. Well, it's just like there's such a hot spot there of violent crime that is not reflected in the larger average. And
I hear you, and I think there's just a slightly different way to look at it. But to Dutchtown, Gravois Park, Baden, Forest Park Southeast, a variety of neighborhoods are always on our radar screen. So the idea of splitting, and Dutchtown is the most densely populated neighborhood, so I look at it at population density, not necessarily acreage, and I agree with you that Dutchtown and Gravois Park have some real challenges. The idea was about splitting those neighborhoods is that so you actually get coverage from 2 districts in those neighborhoods, from the 1st and the 3rd. And the idea is to bring more officers and more resources. So it wasn't by happenstance that they were divided. It was divided so one district didn't become overwhelmed with the workload in Dutchtown, say, and then areas like Carondelet and Marine Villa and other places suffered because of it. So there's a little bit of strategy into that. So from a neighborhood and an organizer's perspective, we have to understand who's committing the crimes. We have to get into those neighborhoods with the resources. So, and what I mean by that is there is this perception of this no snitch mentality. That hurts all of us. And so we can't get prosecution if we don't have neighborhood participation and witnesses and victims. And you would be surprised how many times officers have stories, and I know they're anecdotal, but you'll appreciate this, that they said, I don't want to get involved, I don't want to deal with it, not me, somebody else. So that's why the neighborhood ownership model, and I appreciate your comments about not seeing the energy in the neighborhood ownership model, we'll breathe back into it. Those are the things that have to happen. And then when somebody is a victim or a witness, the neighborhood has to rally behind them and support them and get them to move forward. We didn't talk about clearance rates in murders. The national averages on clearance rates fluctuate between 50, 60%. This year, I think we're at 47% in our clearance rates. It will move up because obviously the cases that most recently happened, we don't have the forensics back. But when you get into the other aggravated assaults and robberies, the clearance rates go down because of witness and victim participation. If we're going to hold people accountable, we have to get those neighborhood people organized and into it. And so I agree with you.
I want to make sure that we're not just looking at increases and changes, because to see even a small decrease in crime in Dutchtown and Gravois Park would not be a good goal. So I want to make exactly. So I want to make sure that we'll continue to look at density of violent crime as a metric, because we have such a density of violent crime down here in the 20th ward. And
I'll invite all of the aldermen. Every Thursday morning at 9 o'clock, we do CompStat, and this would be an opportunity for you to come hear the captains present, and you'll hear the themes from Dutchtown and Gravois Park and Baden and the variety of the other areas that are consistently on our radar screen and the strategies that we have to try and get them. And you'll hear about the burglaries, you'll hear about the larcenies, you'll hear about the aggravated assaults, the robberies, really what we're trying to do to get into it. So just let me know you want to come, and we'll have you to that meeting.
Great. And you talked about targeting individuals. individuals, and I think we've talked about Rick Rosenfeld recommending hotspot policing and hotspot individuals. It's my understanding that Kansas City has introduced a focused deterrence model that takes that idea and broadens it a little bit. Have we looked into something like that?
We've actually sent people to Kansas City to look at it. There is no good research data on Kansas City about if that program works or not. And I think I talked about it earlier. They are seeing they're plus, I believe it's 5 murders this year as well. So the data and the jury's still out. But we are moving towards a similar model. Here's the challenge, and we can have a real conversation about it. 2 or 3 years ago, the environment might have been, or the environment that we live in, might have been that we could go out and do these broad nets and bring lots of people in and say, if anybody in your social circle misbehaves, we're going to come after you. I don't know if the environment is there for that right now, and that's really what the focused deterrent is in Kansas City, that they throw out a broad net and say that, you know, you live in this neighborhood and you're part of the same social group with this person, and if somebody in your social circle misbehaves, we're going to come after you for nuisance violations. We're going to come after. I don't know if that's the right approach for the climate and the environment right now. I'm not sure if that was ever the right approach to hold others accountable. It was really kind of the peer pressure, but to throw a broad net out like that, in my opinion, it falls into that stop, question, and frisk area that we've seen a failure in New York about.
So Mary Ellen Ponder, when she was here earlier, I don't think she's here anymore, but she talked about how we have too many guns on our streets, and it's my understanding with Amendment 5 passing just this last year that we have even fewer tools to remove the guns from the hands of convicted felons. She mentioned that with the rural conservative legislature that we have here in the state of Missouri, we have limited tools to kind of change that, but that we need to focus here in St. Louis City. What can we do as a Board of Aldermen to change that? And I understand that we don't have a lot of tools to go against what our state has set forth, but what can we do? Do you see anything that we can look to this year?
So let's start with Amendment 5 was crafted by, was a political solution for a legislator who wants to be Attorney General. And it did not take into consideration the impacts that it would have in the urban core. So much so that I'm challenging, as you know, Amendment 5 in the state Supreme Court, and hopefully at the end of the month or very soon we'll have a ruling in that. Judge Durker interpreted the law. I believe he interpreted it correctly, although I don't agree with it. I think his legal interpretation was correct, that when we arrest somebody with a firearm, they can plead that it's my inalienable right. So what we can do, I got 2 things. What we can do as a city is look to places like Chicago, which have enacted gun laws which have different parameters inside the city of Chicago. And Mary Ellen Ponder and Winston Calvert, I believe, are looking at introducing legislation that would do that. And it would bring those cases into municipal court, into the city court, but at least we're keeping them in the process. The other thing that I'm extremely happy about is that we have forged new relationships with the U.S. Attorney's Office that we haven't had before. And the U.S. Attorney, in a way that I have not seen in my career, is willing to engage convicted felons with guns because they don't see the outcomes in state court, and taking those to the federal court. And as you know, the consequences in the federal court are much more severe. 85% of a sentence is going to be served for that. So I would say, in a way that is tremendously helpful, the U.S. Attorney has really stepped up in the last couple of months because they've seen what Amendment 5 is doing to the system.
So you mentioned earlier that O'Fallon Park has really done a great job to push crime down, and I'd like to commend Alderman French for those efforts, and as well I'd like to kind of make sure that we continue to remember that investing in our communities and investing in our parks and our community centers does a tremendous amount to reduce crime in our neighborhoods, and I'd just like to make sure we remember that moving forward. And I'd like to take this moment now to re-echo my concerns about Gravois Park and Dutchtown, because I can see that it's very, very, very important to my constituents. In fact, I have one here today, a resident of Gravois Park who finds public safety is so important to take time out of her day to be here. And so again, that's just a very, looking at these density metrics are extremely important to us as we move forward. So thank you.
And I agree. And Seeing decreases are a good start. Getting to 0 is where I want to be.
Right.
Realistically, we live in a world where crime will occur, but you know, a 2% decrease is not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for really changing the quality of life in those neighborhoods, and that's why. And we haven't talked about it, but the problem property process, we have to keep. And Dutchtown, and you've got some great stories about that in Dutchtown. We have to hold landlords accountable for the people that they rent to and the behaviors that happen there. And so I've been working with the city councilor's office and John McLaughlin, who is just a tremendous resource that we have, to make sure that that process gets stronger too. Because that's really, economics is everything. If you have a piece of property and it's not generating money, you can't lower your standards just to make sure that the revenue comes in. I understand the model, but when St. Louis has such a mixed housing stock throughout the entire city, when you've got multifamily on the same block with single family, we have to make sure those multifamilies are stable and don't disrupt the single families.
Great, thank you so much.
Do you need to make a change? We could do it now,
Yeah.
before we go to the next. Green. She was an independent. I was thinking the same thing. You ready? Okay, thank you. Alderwoman Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chief, for being here and being up on your feet for so long answering questions from us today. A lot of my questions have been asked already, but there are a few that I want to follow up on, particularly regarding the PERF announcement or the PERF study. But instead of looking at kind of the regionalism component of it, I'm most interested in what I guess is recommendation 8 and 9. And 8 is creating a central data warehouse about policing in St. Louis City and County that is accessible to police officials and members of the public. So one of the, the concerns I most get from my constituents is they'll say, okay, we know that X number of houses were broken into. We know that there were gunshots in this block this night, and then we never hear anything afterwards about if anybody was ever apprehended, if they were ever charged, if the only time we ever hear anything is if there's been, some really, really bad assault or something like that, and the neighborhood is called upon to put together neighborhood order protection or something like that. But other than that, we really don't have good information about the ongoing, efforts, the investigation efforts that's being done. And so I'm wondering what plans are in place or what is in place that can give community members more insight into how your investigations are going, what your case closure rate is, how many of our homicides are still being investigated versus how many are kind of cold cases, that kind of information.
So actually, we've done something new within the last couple of months. Is on our website, you talked about homicides, are updated weekly stats about the number of homicides, the number of investigations that are closed, the number of issues from the circuit attorney's office, number of neighborhoods that have seen those, really demographics of the suspects, victims. So really trying to get into that. At that level, it's relatively easy to do. There are some privacy issues, as you can imagine, about getting into it. I want to be as open and transparent about as much as we possibly can. I do like the idea, because I think that crime is a regional issue, about compiling all of that into one database. As you can imagine, people in Ladue and Chesterfield and Clayton may not think the same way. So we're working towards that. But I would be happy to, and so the aldermen know, I also compile crime statistics by your individual wards. That's available to you. As much data as we can push out in as many different ways as we can push out, I'm open to. Maybe we can sit down and talk about it and show me really what you're looking for, and I can craft or create something to do it. Because I think the more we know and the more data we have, the better informed we are, the better decisions that we can make. So as you can see, I have lots of data. Sometimes it does get overwhelming and too much, but I want to use it in a constructive way. So I do like that recommendation. What's interesting is I'm participating in a study with UMSL and Dave Klinger about that, and I think St. Louis and LA or St. Louis and New York are going to compile data, and so Klinger's going to do an analysis, and maybe we'll get some ideas and best practices out of that about how larger agencies, or mid to larger, should be reporting data. So I agree, more information is always good.
And I have a constituent who has sent me kind of a blueprint of how he thinks this could be done. So I would love to sit down at some point and talk about
the only thing I always, and we'd have to at some point get the attorneys involved, is when something's open and when something's closed. But at a data level, at a number level, I think we're pretty good.
Right. Okay. And the second question, or the second recommendation, was survey the community on an ongoing basis to measure citizen satisfaction with policing services and assess progress over time. And I think this is where I have kind of the biggest concerns, and I think this is where we, still have a lot of work to do in kind of bridging that gap between police and the community. We have a pretty good NOM model in our ward. And we still had an incident where a police officer referred to people as thugs in that meeting, which then resulted in me getting a bunch of email complaints from constituents about that not being appropriate, and now I don't feel comfortable calling police. And so, I really appreciate you saying, the talk that you're giving to, new graduates and how that level of communication and the words that we use really matter. But what does that look like going down the chain of command to ensure that what is being communicated through the ranks is those same messages?
So, and I actually like that recommendation in the report too. The Metropolitan Police Department, and it's been 5 years now, did a customer satisfaction survey basically. And we did call out to about 100 residents, 100 numbers in each district, and got the feedback. I think it's time for us to do that again so we can begin to understand how we're perceived, where our areas for growth are. I've seen the entire conversation and discussion about the words thugs. I will tell you at some point, police officers didn't like the word cops. And so really, hey, I think we can be we need to be as professional as we can in our communication, but I also think that we have to also realize and not be hypersensitive around issues too. And a description like that should not be the thing that fractures our relationship. We can do better. I think the community can also do better.
I think there has to be a certain amount of being aware of how that word can be interpreted to certain people. And that's what my concern is.
And I hear you. I think we have to start with the president and the attorney general and work our way down too.
Oh, I agree. So, I take issue with that as well. But it's just.
But I've heard you that in your community causes some people to feel uncomfortable. It's something that we can work on.
Yes.
But again, I don't think words should be the thing that caused the fracture. I think we have to look at overall intent.
Well, and then the last thing I want to talk about, and I'll admit I had another meeting during the time that you gave the tour of the Real-Time Intelligence Center and couldn't be there, but I would like to tour it at a later time. But really my concern about it is it seems that we are investing in reactionary versus proactive measures. That when you look at the data that's out there that on the efficacy of the use of cameras, it's not great in showing that it really prevents crime. And so, when we get a $500,000 grant from Motorola that goes, into the Real-Time Intelligence Center, part of me says, would that money be better spent if we were investing in more youth job programs or investing more in education or all of those things that you outlined in the beginning that really do work to prevent crime rather than just trying to catch people after the fact?
I think $500,000 to get Alderman French to stop asking me to monitor his cameras is probably a pretty good investment.
I think we disagree on this one issue.
So I understand that. I think we have to look at the efficiencies that are, and I said we have to find a balance between technology and law enforcement. Chicago, just as an example, 21,000 cameras. London is the most camera city in the world, and I think the average Londoner is caught something like 89 times on cameras. Certainly they have a use and a utility. The question is where is the balance? Are we behind the curve? Is there, I'm making it, is it 1,000 cameras, 3,000 cameras? What's the right number? And then I think that we need to invest in certainly education, substance abuse, all jobs, all the things you talked about. We have to have metrics that can gauge the success of that. I think that's part of the reason that the Justice Department cut back on the amount of money that law enforcement agencies can give to community groups because there weren't metrics there. So I think there's a balance. I think we've become so dependent on technology. If we don't invest in it, we're behind the curve, and people are critical of us. Why don't you have cameras? Why don't you have LPRs? Why aren't you using them? But I hear you too. I think we have to invest in the people. So we just have to find the balance.
And I think the other part of that is communication with the public. I think a lot of us thought that Real-Time Intelligence Center was kind of stalled.
Real-Time Crime Center.
Okay, Real-Time Crime Center was kind of on the, was slowed basically as we were waiting for the GEO bond, and then many of us were surprised that this was coming, you know, forth. And even though, you know, we are understanding this is a pilot phase, but what engagement was really done to, you know, with the St. Louis community to say this is the direction we want to go, rather than trying to find other pots of money, private donors or whatever, to invest in these other types of crime prevention programs.
Well, as I've tried, and certainly there is a group, and you represent some of them, that are skeptical or are concerned about that. As I travel around to other groups in the city, people are like, why don't you have cameras? Why don't you do this? Why don't you do this? And then we look to other cities around the country. We sent people to Chicago. We sent people to Charlotte, Mecklenburg. We sent people to Indianapolis. We sent people to a variety of places to look at best practices and what was being done. So things that are being done in St. Louis are similar to being what's done in other places around the country. When we talk about St. Louis being able to compete on the same plane with Charlotte, Mecklenburg, with Indianapolis, all of these things go into the equation. And so if we agree economics are the way out of this, and I think we all do agree economics, we have to make investments into infrastructure. This is an investment into infrastructure. I think the key is to have strong policies around how the cameras are used, strong policies around how the cameras are monitored. I think all of those things have to go into it. Certainly there's the opportunity for input into that. But I think, I'm looking at Alderman French, from day one he goes, monitor my cameras, monitor my cameras. I'm a month into this. We're a month into this. So now he's still yelling at me because I'm not monitoring his camera. So
and then you have me over here who's saying, you know, I'm uncomfortable with this.
But I think that everything that we monitor is in public space. None of them peer through windows in the middle of the night. Everything, when you go into a bank, when you go to a movie theater, when you go to Target, everything is recorded on video. So if that technology has been widely accepted, if all of us post things on YouTube, and people have recorded me dozens of times on YouTube doing my job, and I have no input and say into that. So I think the expectation is that as a society, this is part of our culture now. Technology, video, Instagram, Facebook is all part of our culture.
I don't disagree with that. What I disagree with is the, you know, not really feeling like the community was informed in that process, and also feeling that there are other mechanisms that perhaps that money could have benefited.
I'd be happy to take you on a tour, show you, and then talk about this, because I do believe there's a balance between technology and boots on the ground, if you will.
And then the last thing I wanted to talk about as we talk about court reform is, you know, I hear a lot today of people saying we have to be very tough on criminals, we have to you know, sentence people for longer times, but I think that there has to be a balance there too, because we also see an over-incarceration rate of people who are convicted of nonviolent drug offenses. And we're not really investing in the substance abuse treatment, the things that could actually stop people from going and stealing the copper piping out of the houses in my ward. And so at some point in time, you know, in that discussion, I would like us to say that there are certain categories of crimes that, yes, we need to push for harsher sentences, but that incarceration isn't always the best vehicle to prevent future crimes for all types types of crimes that are out there.
And I just for clarification, I've always said we need outcomes to keep our community safer. And so I've never said longer jail sentences or different sentences. I said we need outcomes that keep our community safe, because I agree with that. We can't police our way out of this problem. We can't arrest our way out of this problem. But we have to get outcomes that keep us safer. And so I agree, but we also have to be honest with ourselves that some of those lesser crimes are pipelines, are paths
right.
To committing more violent crimes. And so if we get the outcomes at the early level, I agree with you. But outcomes are what we're looking for, not necessarily incarceration.
I think that might be all of my questions, so thank you very much.
Just walked out. So.
Wear out your battery?
Okay, according to the plan, we're reaching our ending hour here from the time that you got up. We know that, I do know that there are some follow-up questions that members of the committee had. I was going to give Alderman Bosley the opportunity. He had yielded his time, but I think he had to leave. So I'll begin to entertain. We're just going to go to 12:30. So we can entertain, it looks like, one of the follow-up questions. I would like to have you come next week. We talked about that earlier.
10 o'clock next Thursday.
For next Thursday.
Yep.
And we could have any other follow-up questions from members of the committee at that point. We will start right now with Alderman French on a follow-up question, but we are ending at 12:30.
Okay. So we can hit a lot depending on your answers, how long your answers are. So first, I really want this to be somewhat of a productive meeting. And I think at this point, so far, I feel like we've engaged in a lot of conversational judo here. And I don't know if there's been a lot of deflection, but I haven't really seen anything that looks like you see that there has been an increase in violent crime, that up to this point, a strategy has not worked as well as you want it to, and that these are the things we're going to do moving forward to change and adjust the strategy. What I don't want us to do is to stick with a losing strategy. And so I agree with you. We have very limited resources. And so when you have limited resources, your strategy is really a reflection of your priorities. And I still would harp on these things. First is that I think we need to reallocate officers based upon violent crime. Violent crime has to be our priority. A rise or a spike in car break-ins is not going to get us on the front page of the New York Times. But a 30 or 40% increase in homicides and us becoming the murder capital of the Midwest will. So we have to prioritize violent crime. And I'm not just saying that with self-interest, because the 21st Ward boundaries don't include those neighborhoods that are the most violent, have been violent for years. So we do need to focus on neighborhoods like Walnut Park, like Dutchtown, like Mark Twain, like Baden. I want to see those neighborhoods get an increased presence in officers. Call it long-term hotspot policing, okay? Not 2 weeks, but like 12 months. And I think you'll see a reduction in crime. Second is allocation of resources, prioritizing. I don't think it's fair that parks are not seeing park resources, specifically park rangers, allocated where the need is. And frankly, those park organizations, we at Forest Park, Tower Grove, that have significant private resources, it might be time to start asking them to take on more responsibility with providing security and paying for security for that park. If we have very limited resources and there are places where people are getting shot, then we need to allocate those resources to those areas. The Real-Time Intelligence Center, I got concerns about it. Not the same concerns as Alderwoman Green, but my concerns is that, one, is that last time we talked as a body, it wasn't being done yet. We were still waiting. My concern is that it was basically done without our input. It was done through private funds, which got around us, and that it was put online, again, prioritizing, it seems, areas with money instead of areas with crime. So I don't know how you put a real-time intelligence center or a camera watching operation online and don't include north side cameras.
And I don't know how many different ways I can say this. It's just in the spin-up phases now, and we will bring your cameras in. I've said that.
Are you watching some cameras now?
No, on a daily basis we are not. So it's still in the spin-up phase, it's still in the training phase, and we did the introduction to try and get at some of these causes, some of these questions that you have. We invited people in, we wanted to show them so we could get the feedback so you could know what we're doing. So to answer your question, on a daily basis, is anybody sitting there watching cameras yet? No, they're in training, and we will bring your cameras in.
So I would prefer if it was done in a more formalized way, where there's actually a plan presented, one that we would have improved, one we would have funded, that would have presented the plan for the rollout, what cameras are going to be watched. What I really don't want it to do is, while there may be some public safety benefit, I don't want it to be just us publicly subsidizing the watching of private cameras. There is some benefit to that, but that is also a cost that perhaps those private companies and groups should bear that we shouldn't do ourselves.
And this is probably, if you would want to come and look at it, the idea is never to watch private.
Should be a plan.
And there is a plan.
It should be seen by everybody.
And the idea is never to replace a private entity. What it is, and Chicago has the best model. They own 3,000 cameras of how many ever 1,000 that they own. But they've leveraged the private investment to bring it in. When we have a public safety need, we have access to their cameras. So we don't sit there and watch the cameras of people going through a door for them or watch the cameras. If there's a public safety need, we have access to them. So that's really your cameras. We're not going to watch everybody that walks down the street 24 hours a day, but if there's a public safety need, we have access to them. So that's really the model. And I think I can hear the confusion in your voice, and that's why we had an open house, invited people to come and talk about it and ask questions. Be happy anytime you want to come walk you through it and show you what we're doing. And so.
But what I really want is something written down. So like, this is how the plan is going to be. This is specifically what cameras are going to be included, et cetera. And I know I'm on time here, so a couple things. Neighborhood ownership model, again, with prioritizing and allocating resources, I really think every neighborhood that steps up to participate in that neighborhood ownership model deserves a neighborhood officer, because that's the only way it works. Those neighborhoods, that NOM that is most successful are the ones that get their own officer. And I think if a neighborhood and you have people committed to making it work, then we need to commit to allocating an officer to make it work.
And I don't disagree with you. Here's the problem. That I dedicate that officer, that's one less officer to answer radio calls or to focus on the priorities that we have. So I'm trying to balance all of those things.
So you know, I'm sure there are officers who are not out on the streets right now that need to be allocated.
And I would probably disagree with you that, because we've done such a strong job of taking those desk jobs away. I use officers that are injured on limited duty to fill a lot of those roles now that couldn't be back out on the street while they're going through therapy or surgeries. So there are not a cadre of officers. There's not a vast pool of officers that have administrative jobs that aren't out on the street.
Okay. And last thing about hiring here. So a couple of things. One is, if we do pass these bills that are going to be introduced next week that allocates or creates new tax revenue to pay for these 160 officers. So what we know is that the soonest they would get on the streets or go through the training or whatever would be about 24 months from now.
18 to 24 months, right.
So if we do get 160 officers, say we're able to fully staff what it would pay for.
Well, let me back up just a little bit. 18 to 24 months is to make them a productive officer, because they've got field training. They'll be out on the streets in that 12 to 18, but to be productive, 18 to 24. So just so we're clear.
But so my question is that actually going to get us an increase in officers, or will that just keep up with attrition?
No, I'm pushing personnel now to keep up with attrition. Those 160 new officers are on top of our authorized strength. So if I'm 51 officers short now, I've got 24, I think it is, in the academy, I said. I'm pushing personnel to give me another class of 30 or 35 at the end of July, beginning of August, and then those 160 new officers will be on top of our full authorized strength. I want to stay as close to our authorized number as I physically possibly can, and those additional officers. So just to give you an example, we're 51 officers short and 160. That's a swing of 210 officers. I'm not talking about matching attrition. I'm talking about new bodies on the street.
Okay. And the last point I'll bring up, and this is, I think, something I see Winston there, so this might be a question for him too, is one of the problems that we have is that city pay isn't as high as some municipalities out in the suburbs. And so what seems to happen too often is that they poach our folks.
They do.
So we train them, we pay for them, we raise our taxes to pay for them to go through the academy. and then a municipality in the county will pay them $15,000, $20,000 more per year. They'll either steal them in the first 36 months, or in some cases I've heard that one guy went through the thing and then 2 days before graduation
He
quit
left
and
to go
took
to,
a job out there.
in O'Fallon, Illinois.
So we paid for the whole training, and then they stole them. Why don't we sue? Can we sue for poaching?
So he did not get his post license, so he will have to go through some training. We have a contracted officer sign that if they leave, and it's 3 or 5 years, off the top of my head, they have to reimburse the city for their training. So anybody that leaves before that contract expires, we do have, and Winston can talk about it better, but we do have a contract signed with them that they have to reimburse for some amount of their training. And you're right, pay, just to give you an example, St. Louis County's starting pay is now $8,000 higher than a city officer's starting pay. So if you're a young officer and you want to be a police officer and you have a chance to go make $48,000 a year, or a chance to go make under $40,000 a year, or right at $40,000, it's a pretty simple math problem to do.
I heard some municipalities like Clayton pay as much as $50,000.
There are agencies, I was just the county, because they're the biggest, they raised, and just recently their starting pay $8,000. So that's the reality. We have a collective bargaining agreement with the SLPOA. I think when that comes up and we talk about the economic issues, we have to address it. We've talked about reform in firefighters' pensions. I think there are some opportunities for new hires in the police retirement system that could have financial benefit down the road. We have to really look at all of those things, because I think our pay has to be competitive, or will continue to be a training ground for municipalities.
So are we going to prioritize violent crime?
I think violent crime is already prioritized. What you're seeing is those 50 officers, Mobile Reserve, are in the neighborhoods that are seeing the violence. They're in Wells Goodfellow. They're in the 6th District. They were there last night. So they are prioritized, and they are in the neighborhood. The challenge that you and I both have is there aren't always precursors. Young man that was shot downtown, no precursor. In the wrong place at the wrong time, somebody saw him. If we could find a method to identify him. So what I have is aggravated assaults, shootings, neighborhoods that have historically high violence. That's where our priorities are. Dutchtown, one of the most problematic areas that we have. It's a priority. We talk about it every week. We put resources into it every week. So I hear you, and I don't disagree with you. But I have a whole city to manage. We have a whole city to manage, not just a fraction of it. And so we have to...
Wherever the violent crime occurs, though, whether it's North Patrol or 6th District, wherever it occurs. But I mean, I think one of the problems we have is that as of the last stats I saw from a couple days ago, we had 58 homicides. I think 59. It's up to 60 now. 58 homicides, and 39 of them were unsolved. So I mean, literally people are getting away with murder.
Well, but I think you have to be a little bit more about the conversation. DNA takes 6 to 8 weeks to get back. Ballistic evidence...
Not any better for previous years. It's still around 50%.
And then the national average is between 50 and 60. So when we talk about it, I agree, not good enough, but the reality is the national average fluctuates between 50 and 60. Could be a little under 50, could be a little over 60. So we're in a range there. But 39 murders, the last one that you just talked about, I won't have DNA back for 6 or 8 weeks. I won't have ballistic evidence back for a week or so. I won't have. And so you have to look at it in its totality and not just this happened and unfortunately it's not CSI. I can't solve a homicide in 45 minutes with 3 commercial breaks.
All right.
Okay. All right. We'd like to thank you for coming and speaking to us today. We will resume this next Thursday.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our meeting is adjourned.